to go, councilors, I'm going to hereby call to order this October 12th meeting of the Council of the City of Lancaster. I have a few items I'd like to address off top. First of all, as I think many of you are aware, the meeting is being live streamed, and so I just want to notify you that we are being recorded and broadcasted basically live on the internet. Now is a great time to take the opportunity to please silence your cell phone or put it on vibrate, as I've had to just do a moment ago. Yesterday, as again you likely know, was Indigenous Peoples Day. The city does not observe the other holiday. I just wanted to take a moment to note that this meeting occurs on what was most likely Susquehannock and Lenni Lenape land before we move forward. And then finally, a slightly lower note, I just want to take a moment to mention I was made aware that Mr. Terry Brown passed away over the weekend, affectionately known to many throughout the city and in his neighborhood as Mousy. He was a regular fixture both downtown and in city council meetings for a number of years. And I think, you know, some people found him difficult to adjust to, but top to bottom, I think Mr. Brown was motivated by concern for his city and for his community. I remember he approached me on the street to tell me 2 summers ago, before the pandemic, that he would not likely be attending meetings that summer because he would be running a summer activity for youth in the city. We'll take a moment of silence to recognize Mr. Brown. Thank you. Thank you. Now, if you are willing and able, if you would join me in rising for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated. Mr. Harris, if you would please call the roll of members.
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. Arroyo.
Here.
Ms. Beke.
Here.
Ms. Craig. Ms. Diaz.
Here.
Mr. Garcia Molina. Mr. Soto. And President Smith-Waddell.
Here. We are a small but mighty team this evening, and all 3 of our colleagues are excused. We'll then go to the approval of the minutes for the September 28th, 2021 meeting.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any council comments on the minutes? Hearing none. Mr. Harris.
Mr. Arroyo.
Aye.
Ms. Beke.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
And President Smith-Waddell.
Aye. That brings us to proclamations, honors, awards, and resolutions of recognition. We have 3 this evening. We're going to begin, and I'll pass the floor over to Mayor Sirachi for a mayoral proclamation recognizing Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Mayor?
Thank you, President Smith-Waddell. It is my pleasure to continue to raise and elevate awareness related to domestic violence here in the city of Lancaster and literally everywhere. And I'm just going to share a few of the highlights from this and then a very quick story. And then I'd like to introduce Christine, who's here to accept this on behalf of the domestic violence services that is part of a community action partnership. Whereas in just one day across the United States and its territories, 76,525 victims of domestic violence received services from domestic violence programs and shelters. That same day, more than 11,000 requests for services, including emergency shelter, housing, transportation, childcare, and legal representation could not be provided because programs lacked resources to meet victims' needs. And whereas the impact of domestic violence is wide-ranging, directly affecting individuals and society as a whole, here in this community and throughout the United States, and whereas racism, homophobia, transphobia, ageism, and discrimination based on physical ability, nationality, or other factors helps to perpetuate domestic violence and makes finding safety even more difficult for some victims, and whereas the need for safe, affordable housing continues to be rated as survivors' most urgent need. And whereas Lancaster joins with others across Pennsylvania and the nation in supporting victims of domestic violence, as well as local programs, state coalitions, and national organizations who are committed to increasing public awareness, which is what this is about, and sending a clear message to abusive individuals that domestic violence is not tolerated in Lancaster. And whereas domestic violence impacts millions of people each year, but it can be prevented. Preventing domestic violence requires the collective voice and power of survivors, individuals, families, institutions, and systems whose stories of strength and resilience add valuable and powerful components to transforming our communities. Now, therefore, I, Denise Sirachi, Mayor of the City of Lancaster, hereby proclaim October 2021 as Domestic Violence Awareness Month in recognition of the important work done by survivors, the Domestic Violence Services of Lancaster County, and other victim service providers. I urge all citizens to actively participate in the scheduled activities throughout this month and programs that are sponsored by DVS and its community partners to work towards the elimination of intimate partner violence. And I'd also just like to say that, you know, when I was out and about last week, knocking on doors and talking to people about the SOE neighborhood services, had an experience in which a woman was thrown out of her home with a 40-ounce beer can that was thrown at her and a lot of yelling and screaming. And this is just a few blocks from here. And I just, it happened just randomly that I was there and was able to have a conversation and be a support for that person at that moment. And I would call on all of us to do all that we can in every way that we can to help survivors when they're ready to access the services that are available in our community. And with that, I'd like to introduce Christine and present this proclamation.
Thank you. Good evening. On behalf of DVS, I'd like to express our thanks to Mayor Sirachi and the members of Lancaster City Council for once again recognizing the importance of October as Domestic Violence Awareness Month with this proclamation. Last year, DVS served nearly 1,800 adults and children, up 17% over the prior year despite the pandemic. We sheltered 188 adults and children, more than half of them in local hotels. And we answered 693 hotline calls and text messages. We know that this is not representative of all the victims and survivors of domestic violence in Lancaster County. Many may not see themselves as victims because the abuse they've suffered is not physical. Others may not be aware that withholding or destroying financial resources as a method of control is abusive, and that there is help available to achieve economic stability absent the abusive partner. Still, others may believe that the put-downs, the verbal attacks, and the gaslighting do reflect their worth as human beings, because that is what they've been told over and over again by someone they love. So it's, as Mayor Sirachi said, it's up to all of us to do something about this, to listen, provide support, encouragement, and importantly, access to resources. Speak up and be able to articulate all of the types of abuse. We really do need everyone. Please contact us to find out what you can do to get involved. Thank you again for recognizing Domestic Violence Awareness Month and the important work that DVS does for Lancaster County. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now go to Council Resolution number 56, 2021, supporting the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. This is the PRO Act. I'll hear a motion.
Motion to approve?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. I have two representatives of the labor community here with us tonight, Ms. Sarah Hammond and Ms. Jean Martin, if either of you would like to address council about the PRO Act.
Mr. President, can I read the title?
Oh my gosh, Bernie, I ran right over you. My apologies. Please.
A resolution of the Council of the City of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, supporting and protecting the right to organize, PRO Act, which provides a generational opportunity for the labor movement and the framework to increase pay and protection for workers. We already have the motions.
Thank you. Ms. Hammond. Who, and let me know if I messed this up, is the legislative director for the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO.
You got it. Thank you, first and foremost, President Smith-Waddell, Council, and everyone who came out tonight for this. I know, as you mentioned, my name is Sarah Hammond. I am the Legislative Director with the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO, and it is an absolute privilege to be able to stand here on behalf of over 700,000 working individuals in the state of Pennsylvania to be able to get this passage for the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. This piece of legislation on a grand scale will empower workers to organize, bargain, and reach a first contract after a union is recognized. It'll end employers' practice of punishing striking workers, such as those at the Kellogg plant over in Landisville, just a stone throw from here, by not allowing them to hire permanent replacements. It'll hold corporations accountable by penalizing employers who retaliate against pro-union workers. It'll repeal Jim Crow-era right-to-work laws that lead to lower wages, fewer benefits, dangerous workplaces, and help to exacerbate the inequality and inequity that we see. And it will create pathways for workers to form unions without fear in newer industries like big tech. Our outdated labor laws no longer protect our right to form and join unions, and the Protecting the Right to Organize, or PRO Act, is how our laws allow us to catch up. The PRO Act is the most significant worker empowerment legislation since the Great Depression, and this means that we can allow ourselves through passing this, it's already made it through the House, but to get it through the Senate now, and by showing support through resolutions through municipalities and cities like this, we can make sure we're holding corporations accountable, protecting workers' rights to organize, and repealing those right-to-work laws. So thank you.
Thank you. Before we take general comments, I just want to take a moment to recognize the workers of BCTGM Local 374, as Ms. Hammond mentioned, who are currently striking on State Road in East Hempfield for a fair master contract, which would cover all of Kellogg's U.S. workers at the 4 plants: Lancaster, Battle Creek, Michigan, Memphis, Tennessee, and Omaha, Nebraska. I also want to take a moment because I was a theater major undergrad to recognize the IATSE, the Organized Labor Union for Tech Production and Stagehands for Theater and Film nationwide, and the United Auto Workers, particularly the 10,000 workers who are likely nearing, but we don't know for sure, a strike at John Deere facilities across the United States. There's something is happening, I think, in terms of the labor movement, and as representatives of a city which could not get anything done without organized labor, I think it's important that we add our voices to the chorus supporting this legislation. I will now step off of my soapbox and take comments from members of council.
Well, nobody's going to speak. I will. I can tell you that I was a member of IBEW for 10 years. And with the union, I was able to grow in the company. I never once had to pay for health care. I was able to learn every department, being able to go from a telemarketer up to a technical department where I had the ability to learn about fiber optics. So therefore, I can tell you that I stand with the union. I know how they take care of their employees. We just need to make sure that everybody understands that it's not a joke when people lose their benefits, when they're not able to pay their health care. And if someone gets injured, how expensive it is to the point where you can actually be losing your home or if you're renting a property. So we need to band together and continue advocating for them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Here.
Council President, I just, to continue on that, Councilor Diaz, I think that the right to organize leads to better wages and more stable employment. And we do a lot of talking in this room about the wages of the residents of the city of Lancaster. And so if we can make strides in organized labor in Pennsylvania, that means better outcomes for the residents of the city of Lancaster.
Thank you. Are there any comments from the public? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Harris.
Mr. Arroyo?
Aye.
Ms. Bakay?
Aye.
Ms. Diaz?
Aye.
And President Smith-Waddell?
Aye. Ms. Hammond, Ms. Martin, can I borrow you up front briefly? All right, I believe now we have a resolution recognizing Fair Trade Month. Mr. Harris.
A resolution of the City Council of the City of Lancaster recognizing Fair Trade Month in the City of Lancaster, supporting fair trade, and encouraging the administration of the City of Lancaster to purchase fair trade products when those products are available, meet applicable city standards, and comparably priced to the alternative.
Motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, Council President. With that, I'd actually like to welcome Alyssa Anderson to the podium with the Fair Trade Federation to speak to the resolution. Welcome, Alyssa.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo, and thank you, Council. My name is Alyssa Anderson. I am a proud Lancaster City resident for the past 11 years, and I've had the privilege of working with the Fair Trade Federation since January of 2020. As some of you may or may not know, October is also Fair Trade Month. So in the interest of that, I wanted to introduce this resolution to Council. I'll just do a brief explanation of what fair trade is and what it means, with the caveat that I'll barely be scratching the surface. There's entire college courses on this, but I know nobody probably wants to stay that long tonight. Fair trade is an approach to business based on dialogue, transparency, and respect that seeks to create greater equity. Fair trade can look a lot of different ways depending on the enterprise or the specific organizational affiliation that it has, but regardless of those differences, there are foundational common goals to provide fair payment for all involved, to ensure safe, equitable working conditions, to respect and honor diversity, to use trade as a means of building individual and community capacity, and to cultivate and encourage environmental stewardship. In a word, fair trade is about partnership. In passing this resolution, Lancaster declares itself a city that supports businesses from local to global that hold themselves to a higher standard of trade and encourages and fosters a community that does the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. If I may, Council President, with a comment. Yeah, so first, thank you. I think, Lancaster City has an opportunity to set the example, not only when we talk about fair trade, but setting the example of how to do business for good for other businesses in our community. When we think about the business recovery moving forward after the pandemic, there's going to be a real opportunity to think about how do we do that through the lens of justice, specifically climate justice and racial justice. And when we think about fair trade, that's a great first step in that direction. So I'm honored to be sharing this resolution and presenting it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other council comments? From the public? Hearing none. Councilor Baquet?
No.
Oh. Hearing none. Mr. Harris?
Mr. Roy?
Aye.
Ms. Baquet?
Aye.
Ms. Diaz?
Aye.
And President Smith-Waddell.
Aye.
And Ms. Anderson, if I could borrow you to present you with a paper copy.
Thank you both. That brings us to our first public comment period reserved for those residents who have contacted the city clerk prior to the meeting to request the opportunity to address city council. Do we have any, Mr. Harris?
We do not, Mr. President.
Okay, we'll move then to heading 7, reports requested by council. First, we have the Center for Regional Analysis Housing Study. Director Delfs?
Good evening, Council. Appreciate the opportunity to speak on this topic tonight. I've actually been very excited to present this information to you and to the public for some time. This is a culmination of work over several months amongst city staff within the CPID department, also staff throughout the city organization, and also a great deal of partnership and coordination with our housing partners and organizations throughout the city as well. We have a lot of ground to cover tonight, so I am going to try to move through this material relatively quickly. Usually, I have no problem with interruptions for questions. In this case tonight, I'm going to ask that we hold questions into the end, if that's okay. Let me start with just giving an overview of the contents here tonight. We're going to start speaking about affordable housing and the definition of affordable housing. Linked to that closely is median income levels and how those median income levels play out with respect to state and federal affordable housing programs. In addition to that, I'm going to touch on the economics of affordable housing development. I think many of us know that we have some significant barriers to overcome when it comes to affordable housing development. And that could be its own presentation in its own right, but I'd like to touch on that tonight because I think it's very important to help set the context. Next, we're going to walk through the top 5 findings from the Center for Regional Analysis Housing Study. I have Naomi Young here tonight, who's the director of the Center for Regional Analysis. She's available for questions about the analysis or any aspects of the data that we might have following the presentation. In addition to that, I'll try to hit all the highlights related to the interim housing strategy that is proposed for the city of Lancaster. I was able to send advanced copies of both the study and the strategy to the councilors last week. I hope you've had a chance to at least skim through those, and if you have any questions, even If it is material in those documents outside of the presentation, we'll do our best to answer those tonight as well. And then finally, just a quick transition to affordable housing project development and how that relates to the Rescue Plan Act, which we touched on last week at Council Committee. All right, so should we get rolling? Good. Okay, we'll start here with the definitions of affordable housing. And I think it's always important to start to say, in reality, affordable varies by household. We often think about affordable housing maybe in bureaucratic terms when we're talking about how to apply particular programs, but you can have a rental price for household A and a rental price for household B that are exactly the same, but that it may be affordable or not affordable to that particular family or household. So how do we measure housing affordability when you have that variation amongst households? The main metric that we use for measuring affordable housing is called housing cost burden. If a household is spending 30% or more of gross income on housing costs, that is considered a housing cost burden for that household. There's also a standard called extreme housing cost burden, and that applies when a household is spending 50% or more of their gross income on housing costs. I think it's important that we keep that housing cost burden in mind as we talk about the subject tonight. That's closely linked to median income levels. Many of us have heard a lot of acronyms related to median income. Perhaps you've heard AMI, which stands for Area Median Income. HUD, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, uses MFI, which stands for Median Family Income. In most cases, AMI and MFI are interchangeable. They're not always, but for our purposes tonight, we'll primarily be talking about them as one and the same and focused on median family income. I wanted to touch on this table just to give us an even playing field for the start of the presentation here. In most cases, and particularly when you're working with HUD-funded programs, the distribution of median income levels are broken up this way. So below 30% of the median family income is considered extremely low income. That typically applies to those individuals or households who are experiencing homelessness, who may be in transitional housing or permanent supportive housing. For the very low income median level, 30% to 50%, that is the next rung on the ladder. If you go a little bit higher, to 50% to 80% of the median family income, that's usually defined as low to moderate income. And then finally, you may have heard reference to middle market housing units, and that is typically in the 80% to 120% median family income level. I want to take a moment to flag and benchmark the 60% median family income level. That's a very important level for us because any rental housing that utilizes federal funding for affordable housing must be 60% MFI or lower. The 60% MFI mark is also very important because we're often toggling between county MFI and city MFI. The county median family income at 60% is a little bit lower than the city's median family income. So we'll come back to that if we have any questions. But hopefully we'll keep this in mind as we keep rolling. A few words about the economics of affordable housing development. We often get questions from the public, we get questions from the stakeholders. Why don't we have more affordable housing in the city? Why is it so difficult to achieve affordable housing? We've had very little new housing built in the city, period, in recent years, and we have not had much affordable housing built either. This largely comes back down to the fact that when rents or sale prices are fixed at a low income level to serve residents, it costs more to build the project than the housing developer can recover from the project. So in other words, there's a gap between the cost of construction and the cost of the construction of that housing and the return on investment. So there must be some way to fill that gap in order to achieve affordable housing. Whether it's an affordable housing developer or a private market developer, that gap needs to be filled through public funding in order to achieve any affordable housing units in most cases. Okay, we'll change gears here to the housing study that I mentioned. The title of the study is Housing Availability in the City of Lancaster and Implications for Housing Affordability. I really appreciate the work, the opportunity to work with Naomi and her team at the Center for Regional Analysis. I'm going to touch on the top 5 findings, and again, if there are more questions, we'll come back later. I'm actually going to try to run through this fairly quickly, and I have the text here on the slide for those in the audience. Finding number 1, housing affordability challenges are caused by both supply and demand dynamics. On the supply side, the available housing stock is acting as a constraint and upward pressure on price. On the demand side of the equation, housing cost burden is widespread, largely as a result of low household incomes in the city. When you combine these two, shortage drives prices up, and incomes are not adequate to meet market prevailing rental rates. Finding number 2, the City of Lancaster has a housing shortage. We've probably felt this in a lot of different ways for some time now, and the data is very much bearing this out. Vacancy rates are low, particularly when we factor in that housing age quality is likely limiting the availability of housing units. And there are a number of implications for this. One of the most important is that a sustained tight housing market will continue to cause displacement or create incentives for housing stock to be run down. We have a number of different number of statistics related to these vacancy rates, which we can get into at a later time if you're interested. Finding number 3, the type of housing stock in the city does not align with the household composition of its residents. So there's a mismatch. The majority of the city's housing was built for larger families, but many households in the city are now smaller. 56% of the residential units is comprised of single-family dwellings. And of those single-family dwellings, 83% have 3 bedrooms or more. In contrast, only 30% of city households have children under the age of 18. In addition to that, 22% of the city's housing units are 1 bedroom, but 30% of the city's households live alone. There are a number of implications here as well. This includes that there's a more pronounced burden on cost burden on single earner households, and this analysis also suggests a need for more 1 and 2 bedroom housing units within the city. Finding number 4, the opportunities to increase housing supply in the city are limited. Intentional development in combination with land use and zoning policy that facilitates housing density are critical to significantly increase housing availability. An estimated 88% of the city's property parcels already have some form of housing on it. And the 5th and final primary finding from the study is that housing cost burden is widespread, reflecting the income profile of city residents. This relates in part to finding number 1, but we thought it was important to call out that the housing situation in terms of affordable housing is a challenge for a wide range of household incomes, not just the lowest income. It tends to be the most acute at the lowest income bands, which makes sense. The median household income in the city is $45,570, but that does vary according to household type. If you look at families, the median family income is $57,800 in the city. Again, we have some additional numbers for you, but I'm trying to pick and choose what we throw out on the table since there's a lot of data to cover. All right, we're going to change gears from the housing study to the housing strategy. So looking back at what the trends have been and might be in the future. And now we're going to try to summarize the goals for the next 5 years and what program tools would be most useful in helping us achieve those goals. The interim housing strategy has 3 overarching quantitative policy targets. And again, this is in a 5-year window, so we're not going to achieve this all in 1 year. It takes a lot of time in order to do this housing work. Number 1, the city will facilitate the creation of 2,000 new housing units with the goal of at least 15% of those new units designated affordable. Number 2, the city will protect and improve at least 1,000 existing low to moderate income homes. And number 3, the city will evaluate and address every rental unit in the city with the goal that at least 85% are rated fair or good condition. I want to point out that we aim high. These are aspirational goals. None of these are gimmies. But we want to put this out there as the North Star to move toward over the next 5 years. I tried my best to make this interim housing strategy really compact and accessible for a general audience. It is actually only 8 pages long, so it's not, the scope and scale is not too big, fortunately, but it's dense. I know there's a lot packed in there. There's 5 strategic goal areas within the strategy: produce, protect, acquire, innovate, and sustain. Under each of those strategic goals, there are 3 to 4 program tools or activities that we will use to realize that goal. So in total, we've got 18 tools or activities to help us with implementation. I'd like to point out that this is an interim strategy. The reason why we call it interim is because we're learning a lot month by month. We're doing additional analysis through the comprehensive plan, and we do expect that this document can evolve if needed. So if we have to add a program tool or subtract a program tool based on performance, then we can do that. This is meant to be a living document. The first big goal in the strategy is produce. Produce housing units and new construction to meet demand and expand the number of available homes, both affordable and market rate. This is very important to the supply and making sure that we're taking advantage of those developments that are in the pipeline and getting affordable units out of those projects that are in the pipeline. There are 3 main tools under produce. This is the comp plan, land development, zoning, making sure that is the first one. Number 2 is making sure we're attracting investment capital so that we can build both market rate and affordable units. And then number 3, identifying and utilizing subsidy for affordable units. And we already have this kind of work in practice. A very good recent example that we feature here on the screen is the Landis on King Street project at 239 West King, where we were able to use home funding to ensure that 5 of those new units will be designated for low income. Landis Quality Living is also aiming to have an additional 3 or 5 of those units at moderate income, and the balance will be at middle market level. Big goal number 2, protect. Protect, maintain, and improve the quality of existing housing to help keep households safe and affordable. The first tool, our housing inspections and maintenance program, which is one of the biggest investments we make as a department. The second here is the lead remediation and healthy homes program. The city lead safe program is aiming to remediate and improve over 700 homes over the next 5 years. The LGH Penn Medicine program, which is a complementary program, is aiming to improve about 460 units over the next 5 years. And then finally, the critical repair grant and loan program. So all of these fall under the protect goal. Goal number 3, acquire properties and redevelop for the express purpose of neighborhood revitalization and affordability. We feature a few tools here: the Redevelopment Authority of the City of Lancaster, the Land Bank, and then what we're referring to as city-led conversion. So this means that the city will identify and facilitate select properties for affordable housing and mixed income housing development. A great example here is the work that we're doing on 213 College Avenue. That happened through a donation of land from UPMC, and we were able to arrange a partnership with HDC Mid-Atlantic to build an affordable housing project, not yet built, to plan for an affordable housing project with 64 affordable units at 20%, 50%, and 60% AMI. I'd also like to note here that we've included transitional living facilities as one of the tools within Acquire, because we have recognized that we have an additional need for 40 more transitional units within the city. And that could be a new facility in its own right, or it could be improvement or expansion to existing facilities, such as the Tenfold, TLC, Transitional Living Center, or the YWCA housing units in their building. So there are a couple examples where that's happening, but we may need to expand that overall portfolio. Goal number 4, innovate. Innovate by exploring emerging housing design types, which may facilitate lower cost housing units. Again, we've got 4 program tools or activities here. The first is home sharing and community living models. The second is accessory dwelling units. Third is tiny homes. And the last is reduced parking requirements in target locations, such as the train station district, the area directly around the Amtrak train station. We do feature here in the slide our first tiny house in Lancaster City at 765 Joseph Street. This project was not permitted by right, but involved a design review and approvals by city commissions. The result is a 255 square foot freestanding structure, and the project all-in cost was approximately $50,000 to build. Okay, last but not least, thank you all for hanging in with me. I know this is a lot of material. Number 5, goal number 5 is sustain. Sustain and foster housing stability and neighborhood vitality. The first program tool I'm referring to as safety nets. This really refers to the emergency rental assistance program and the eviction prevention program. Next, homeownership protections. The third is pathways to homeownership, and the fourth is homeless shelter resources. On the slide, we feature one example related to pathways to homeownership. Both Tenfold and SOE average about 80 down payment assistance loans annually. 40 of those loans are in the city. They are 0% interest and have no term. And if you look at the program as a whole since 1994, on Tenfold's website, they call out that over 2,300 individuals have purchased a home as a direct result of working with Tenfold since 1994. So this is an area that we want to continue the success and possibly expand depending on funding availability as well. I have one transition slide for us here. I want to connect the dots back to the conversation that we had last week. I appreciate that we are evaluating potentially a very big commitment to affordable housing in the city. I want to say for someone who this topic has been near and dear to my heart, so I'm very proud that the administration and the city council is considering this level of investment in affordable housing. Last week, the mayor talked just about the big picture, basically that we were looking at a potential allocation of $5 million to implement what was just presented here in the interim housing strategy. So we've got a lot of tools for implementation, and we need to make sure that we have the funding to support those tools and to supercharge that work. We do have some remaining questions about how, that's the big picture. How are we going to review the individual projects and expenditures that come before us? I think this is worth additional discussion. One recommendation I would put on the table is I think it would be valuable for the City Council's Economic Development Committee to review the details of individual projects and expenditures. And we have just gotten underway with vetting a few potential projects that we could use funding, the ARPA funding for. Only one of those projects so far has been under a particular time constraint. So I mentioned here in the last box that 838 Marietta Avenue was a property that had been on the market for a little while. The city saw that as a potential site for housing development, and we've entered into an option to acquire that property. We're in a 60-day due diligence period, so we do have some urgency to make a decision on that particular project. We have talked with HDC Mid-Atlantic again about the potential of making this an additional phase to the great affordable housing work that we've been doing in and around the UPMC campus. So happy to talk more about that today. I do just want to caution, though, my hope today is that we talk really about the context and the need first, and then that will lead us into some good decisions, I believe, about the individual projects that come before us in the weeks and months and years to come to spend the ARPA funding. I'd like to reiterate that Naomi Young is here to answer questions on the study. If you so desire, I'm also happy to answer any questions that you might have. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Director Delfs. Councilors?
Council President? Thank you, Director Delfs, for that, and thanks to the work that was done in the study. I think there was a lot of things that we already knew, which is
Yes.
the outcome that you often want when you endeavor to do these types of things, and also some interesting things that came out of it about housing size. It was sort of new information for me. I just have a question about under strategies, two things. Under Protect, you mentioned critical repair grants and loans, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the way that looks now and how much it's utilized, because I have a suspicion that it may be underutilized, and if there's any thought about expanding it as part of that particular strategy.
Yes, that's a great question, and the short answer is yes. We are looking at ways to expand the critical repair program. In the past, my understanding was that we also typically did critical repair loans as opposed to grants.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we're looking at right now is really focusing the critical repair program on households at 50% AMI or under, and making the distribution of funds grants as opposed to loans that require repayment. I think it's also worth noting that we do have some partners that are doing critical repair work as well. So we also have a critical repair program. I don't think it's particularly large at this time, but I think this is where we get into some really interesting questions of how do we want to use the ARPA dollars, either for city staff or for our partners' staff in terms of executing the objectives that we want.
Mm-hmm. Great. And my second question falls under the Innovate.
Yes.
And we may not have specifics on this right now, and I appreciate that, but you mentioned, there's ways that we'll have to get creative to solve a problem. And you mentioned home sharing and community living models. Could you just expand on what that would look like and maybe briefly talk about what types of things might have to change from an ordinance perspective or just a decision-making perspective to make those things happen?
Certainly. The home sharing and community living models is a recognition that we have a number of households in the city, particularly those who are maybe at a younger age or at an older age, who would benefit from smaller living space but shared facilities in some ways. We do have a couple of projects that are in the pipeline that are designed that way, where they're shared common space, social space, shared kitchen, et cetera. The way our zoning ordinance is set up right now is it doesn't prevent that in all cases, but it can make it difficult. And so I would say Douglas Smith is the best person to answer this question, but at least at a broad brush level, that's essentially what's going on, is we'd have to look at most likely zoning ordinance changes. And we could look at incentives as well for if we want to go that route.
Great. Thank you very much.
Council President?
If I may, Councilor Royo. Director Dels, would you just elaborate on the general purpose of the critical repair program for those who may not be aware?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, if you'll bear with me for just one moment, I actually forgot to bring out the strategy document. Thank you for your patience. I just wanted to note that actually a lot of this is spelled out in the strategy. So when the public has a chance to see this, they can actually reference the document. It's actually in 2C, which is the critical repair grants and loans. And as it states here, what we often see is that if you have costly repairs in a home, those put that family in jeopardy of being able to afford that house moving forward. And so it does play itself out as an affordability issue at times. The critical repair program that we have within the city really focuses on roofs, furnaces, utility lines. It can be home accessibility, really those things that affect habitability of the home in a very essential way. And that's what we have used that program for in the past. But to Councilor Bakay's point, I think there are opportunities to expand and improve upon that.
Thank you. Councilor Arroyo.
Thank you, Council President. First, thank you, Director Dels, for the presentation and walking us through the strategy. It was very helpful, and definitely excited to see that the administration and City Hall is very committed to this housing strategy. A couple questions. As far as the goal for the 2,000 new units, is that in addition to the previous goal that we've heard around, might butcher the number, 1,200 to 1,500 units that we've had for the city? Is that going to be an additional 2,000 units over the next 5 years?
Right. So the Building on Strength plan started in 2015 and runs until 2030. So their goal was 2,500 units over that period of time. Unfortunately, we have not made very much progress on that goal yet, but we do have a number of projects that are in the pipeline. Those projects that are in the pipeline, I'm very excited about, but they're still fictional units until those units are built. So really what we're looking at, and we're going to have to compare and contrast like the start and end times of the tracking, the metrics, but essentially what I'm thinking for this plan is that the units that are in the pipeline plus additional units would add up to 2,000. That's our goal.
Got it. Thank you. And for
by 2026. I'm sorry to interrupt you. By 2026.
Got it. And as far as the projects that come, potential projects that come to council, how would that necessarily occur? Will the public have the opportunity to propose new projects if they see a housing need in the community? Would your department be proactively looking for potential projects or sites to develop? How would that process work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't think we have determined that with certainty yet, but I can maybe shed a little bit of light. I do think that there are going to be projects that are of the size and scale, like 838 Marietta Ave, that the city administration would want to drive and present that idea before the public. For other types of projects, for example, the home program that we manage within the department for other affordable housing funds and the CDBG program, we have an RFP process, a request for proposal process that we use for those programs for other community-based proposals. And we have not determined this with certainty yet. I think there's more that we have discuss as an executive team and as a council, but I just offer that as an example of the way we've done it in other situations. We've used the RFP process.
And last question. All these projects will be in the city. Is there potential for collaboration in surrounding areas around the city that might be beneficial to producing more housing supply that might not fall directly in city lines, or would this solely be directly for city limits?
I think so. There are definitely a handful of projects that are on the border. In some cases, they straddle the border. In some cases, they might just be on the other side of the border, whether it's Manheim Township or Lancaster Township. And we have been trying to elevate our coordination on those particular sites. As far as the big picture policy goals, I think that's a really worthy question. I know that the county has at least started down the path of following our example with the housing study. I know they've been talking with the Center for Regional Analysis about possibly expanding the scope, the geographic scope of the study. I also think, and this is just Chris's 2 cents here, but I think the same way that the city has a policy goal for housing units and affordable housing units, I think the county should have the same.
If I can sort of rejoinder two of your questions, Councilor Arroyo. On the review process point, I think a lot of that actually is to us as a body, and in particular to the committees that you and Councilor Craig chair. And I think we'll probably be looking to lean on your committees to evaluate those sort of middle to small projects as they then come to council for full approval. And as Director Delph says, there is an existing RFP process that we use for home dollars, and it's my understanding that the County Redevelopment Authority, and that's my understanding as of 12 noon today, is looking to develop its own sort of LOI process for projects. And so there are examples that the committee could adopt ongoing, because Director Delph, you'll know the time limits for me. While it is both a lot of money and not that much money in the scope of what we're actually trying to do with it, we have until what date to allocate funds and what date to spend them out?
Oh boy.
Yes, it's through December 31st, 2025 to allocate 2024, and then to 2025 to spend.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, 26. Sorry, I'm getting hand signals from Mr. Hopkins. Say it again, Mr. Hopkins. 2024 to allocate, 2026 to spend. Thank you.
Yes. And then I'm sorry, what had been your second question, Councilor Rowe? I had something on that.
It was regarding housing projects that are straddling city limits.
Yeah, just to say that, again, my sense is that there is a lot of interest in that. I will say for my part, we very much need, yes, collaboration, and we need the county to show some leadership. I think as we all know, like, housing issues are mobile and they don't really care about our municipal boundaries. Folks from elsewhere come to the city looking to access more affordable housing and more services, and there are folks in the city who move other places because they can't find rent or homeownership opportunities that are affordable. And so I'm hoping to see the county step up with the truly prodigious amount of money they have received in multiple ways from the federal government to address this throughout the county while we address it within the city.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Council President, if I may, did want to just come back to the home process for a moment and mention that the Lancaster County Housing and Redevelopment Authority under Justin Eby, that leadership just changed recently, and I really have appreciated working with his team so far. The home process went exceptionally well. We were able to coordinate and collaborate and look at all of the project proposals, the affordable housing projects together, both those in the city and in the county. So we were able to make, I think that was the first time that that had ever happened this past year. And that was a huge win, I think. And that team also brought some appreciated expertise to the process as well.
And that was a total of $2.5 million this last round?
The city's portion was $2.5 million for 4 projects within the city. There was a 5th project that straddled the line across into Lancaster Township, a community basics project, and that was funded entirely through the county's portion. And then there were a few additional projects in the county, although we had more affordable housing projects within the city.
I have a question related to, let's say, the project for Marietta Avenue.
Yes.
Is that something that is going to be under HUD? Is that something the city is going to be managing? Can you give me an explanation?
We're very early in the process, but I think that it would follow a similar model to what we're doing at 213 College Avenue. So ultimately, that property was moved into the hands of HDC, and then there were requirements as part of that agreement to develop that housing according to certain standards. I'd mentioned earlier in the presentation, I don't know if it came through loud and clear, but those 64 units are focused on a combination of 20%, 30%, and 60% AMI.
And how many units are you thinking, let's say it gets purchased and the process starts to build, how many units are you looking to have there?
We have not quite gotten there yet, but we really haven't quite gotten there yet. I mean, it will probably be a little bit less than what is at the 213. 213 College Avenue has 64 units. I don't think we'll be at quite that density, but it would be a multifamily building getting fairly close to that number.
And in relation to, like, let's say if there's someone in the community that has a project that would also be addressing some of the affordable housing, is that something that has been looked at? Are you open to some type of,
Absolutely, absolutely open. I mean, one of the things that it's important to note is that at the end of the day, it's our housing partners and our housing developers that actually execute, design, and build the affordable housing. We can't do that on our own as a city, and we welcome any and all good ideas. Absolutely.
Yeah, because I do recall Darlene Bird, that she presented some project that would have, I don't wrote exactly the numbers, but I think she might have said 5 units or something of that nature. So, and I'm sure there are other people. I think there was, what was the gentleman that was here? And that's near that bridge where the flood was. Liberty?
This is the Liberty Street project, yeah.
The private developer.
So, I mean, that's private, obviously, that's not going to fall under this, but it could?
It absolutely could, and I think that's where we do need to get creative. On the one hand, we can work with organizations that are affordable housing developers, but I think where we may be able to get some additional units is we have private market developers who are maybe more aligned in terms of values. And if we are able to say, as a community, as a council, as an administration, we're willing to subsidize you for X number of units, then if you have a big project, a proportion of those those units could be affordable. And I think I personally, as a city planner, like, I've seen that work in other places. I think there's opportunity to do that more here.
And in relations to the number of people, because like you said, there are some places, where they have 3 rooms and then there's just 2 adults and no children.
Yes.
Is there going to be a way to manage that if it's going to be just 1-bedroom apartment, it's only 1 person or a couple versus, a single mother that may have 3 kids that needs maybe 2-bedroom to 3 bedrooms? Is that something that's going to be managed as well?
Most of the new most of the new development projects that we're seeing are leaning more toward the smaller units, studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms. And often developers understand what's going on in the market because they want to build what will be rented. So it's interesting that their analysis or their assessment of what they can rent is very much lining up with what we saw come out in the Center for Regional Analysis study. So I think we don't have the ability in all cases to control the private units, but they will, in most cases, build to the need.
Because I know that Lancaster City, I would say that it's an older crowd, and then you have the newer generation.
Yes.
But the older crowd, a lot of them, they lost their investment, let's say 911, or, that they're fixed income, or they're elderly with some kind of disease or some kind of disability. So I'm looking at the whole outlook of what is going to be available for them as well.
Right. And I think it is important to note that when you're looking at the scale of need and the dollars that we're dealing with, we're still not going to be able to solve for it all with the funding levels that we have, because you just think about the gap that you're covering on every single unit. That said, we have, as the mayor said, it's a once in a generation opportunity to make a much bigger dent in this problem than we have in the past.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have just one more question. So thinking about, there are some outcomes that we obviously want to come out of this plan. And we also, I think it would be worth it, to Councilor Diaz's point, to go back and evaluate, did the things we put in place kind of bear out when we look at housing 5 years from now? Are there thoughts or plans to do another study in 5 years to see if we've meaningfully moved, like, for instance, household size into sort of right-sized units, and obviously created the number of units that we want, but also making sure that they're the right type of units in the right neighborhoods and areas to meet the need?
Yes, absolutely. And I think there's actually 2 things that you're asking in your question. One is related to performance metrics as we go. So the strategy does have a target number of units for each program tool. And so we can track each of those program tools every year during the 5-year period. So that's part of an answer to your question. The other part is around the market analysis, like what is actually happening in the housing market, and are we meeting those needs? And we're very much committed to continuing that analysis moving forward, because I think we really want to make sure we have data-driven decisions that are happening.
Does our study, does our study include an analysis of need by household size or by any other demographic? So as we talked about, like in terms of right sizing, that mismatch, I assume then we have like a sense of like, okay, family size 4, there's a need or a demand for X number of units, and this is where we are in the city in terms of the presence of that number of units. Are those things available as data points?
We do have good data related to a better understanding of housing, of household size by quadrant, by the city as a whole and by quadrant. We will be doing additional housing analysis in the comprehensive plan to try to suss out some of these other questions as well. Does that answer your question? If not, I'm happy for Naomi to jump in too.
Yeah, I think, hi.
Hi.
Do you mind?
No, not at all.
First of all, it's good to see you.
Lovely to see you.
So yeah, just to know, and I know that because it was one of the study's 5 big takeaways that we have this sort of mismatch in terms of available units and households in Lancaster. Do we have that broken? Like, could we say, okay, we have this many family size for who are in need of housing, and there are this many units that could reasonably or to our standards accommodate a family size, a family size for?
Yeah, so when we constructed the estimate of housing in the city, we actually built it up from a parcel data set. So what we're able to do is identify the type of housing that exists across the city by your wards or by census tract, and break that down with estimates about the number of bedrooms that are associated with it. So, this idea of single-family households versus multifamily households versus apartments is embedded in that, along with data on the number of bedrooms that are associated with that. We match that with the census information about household composition, income, race, and household composition isn't just size, it's also, is it two married couples with children? Is it a single female head of household with children under the age of 18? So we're able to do that at a fairly granular level to track all of this. And in fact, the study does give you a little bit of a sense of that, because we go by these different sections of the city, showing how this type of housing that's available lines up with the household composition in that area. And then we can bring in income as well as race associated with those things too.
Thank you. That's great. And I guess this is really, my follow-up is really to Chris. I personally would be interested to see that data, especially on race and income and the demand for housing, combined with what we know about the history of our city. And I would love to see that provided to our strategic plan consultants. I think I certainly feel there's like a really strong incentive to just sort of start from now as we go through these things. But I think, the truth is that much of where we are in terms of generational wealth, income, and housing for the African American and Latino communities comes from a very specific history of things. And so as we are, rezoning, if you will, the whole city, I want to make sure that that's factoring into the strategies that we.
May I just?
Please, yeah.
I apologize, I can't help myself but comment on this.
Oh my God, yeah, please.
So I think it's really important to note that when we look at the demographics of the city, it is really changing over time. What strikes me more than anything is how household income in relation to earning potential impacts affordability. And so it's really striking. If you look at the median household income by race, the differences from a household perspective, from an affordable housing perspective, is not as striking as when you look at the composition of the household, meaning is it a female-headed household? That's where you really see the large income differences and the ability to afford. And when you line that up with then also the type of housing that's needed, you start to see differences emerge in where there are really touch points to address. And that's not to disregard the racial history that's gotten us to this point. But moving forward, the economics of this is about earning potential, household composition, and the fact that we have a system that's set up for thinking about 2 income earners in a household being able to afford housing. And that is not necessarily how household composition is trending.
Thank you.
Sure.
Appreciate the comment. It's something that we have been wrestling with a great deal in the early going of the comprehensive plan process. One of the things that we've talked a lot about is one of our early deliverables is called Lancaster Today report, and that is due at the end of this year from our project team, and that is really focused on not only the current trends that are driving change, but what has happened in recent and not so recent history to create where we are today. And so one of the sections that we've been spending some time on in that report is how are we framing and contextualizing these trends. So I think that's another place we maybe can do a little bit more granular work in terms of the data, but I also believe that in terms of the framing and the policy, that will also come out through some of these early comp plan deliverables as well.
If I just may, if the public is so interested in reading the interim housing report and the analysis that Naomi, where would they find that, Chris?
Well, we're probably going to post it on the website, our city website tomorrow. I wanted to make sure that we had the presentation tonight, but I think the game plan now is to make it available starting tomorrow morning.
Oh, very good. And the last thing I'll just say is that Naomi had done a back of the envelope analysis of one census tract 147, some time ago. This was, I think, right before the pandemic hit. And it was very profound in terms of the single-headed household, women, single-headed households in census tract 147. And there's a lot of analysis, further analysis related to income and affordability that we can look at. And this is also where a conversation that I look forward to having early next year around workforce development and supporting single-headed families can go. And so I'm setting that on the table as a precursor for the conversation that I'm looking forward to having and that we're currently having with some of our partners, specifically focusing on zip codes south of King that very much align with our lead program and how we are having conversations with our neighbors around lead. And then that's also having conversations that can be an entree to having further conversation about other opportunities to support those families using ARPA dollars. So more to come on that. I'm just putting a pin in it for now.
That's appreciated. Also, for reference, Census Tract 147 is one of 4 census tracts that make up the southeast of Lancaster City. And thank you, Naomi, for that refinement. It's very valuable for us to have expertise that can tell us how to target and right-size interventions. So it's much appreciated. Are there any other questions from council? I know we've been at this for a while. Okay. I guess that was both items. We are at 7:20. I will. Yeah, hold on. So I will endeavor to briefly take public comments on these 2 items. The rules are fairly standard. Please come to the podium, speak into the microphone, keep your comments, questions to about 3 minutes in length, and begin with your name and the block of your residence. Ms. Bird.
Darlene Bird, South Ann Street. I had a question about the project. The project that you said that there was a report that was 2038, you planned on so many houses of affordability to be built. And the question from council came, is that 2,000 houses that you're proposing now included in it? And you said some of it.
The economic development plan for the city is called Building on Strength. It was a partnership between the city and Lancaster City Alliance and other partner organizations. That study was completed in 2015, and the horizon for their measures go until the year 2030.
Right.
The number of housing units that they were hoping to achieve by 2030 was 2,500.
Do you know how close we got?
We're only maybe a few hundred in. I'd have to check that for you. But
so when we look at this 2,000, that's like pretty much of that 2,500 if we only got a few hundred in. But I guess my question about that is, how do we know that this plan is going to produce affordable housing? If we had that study that said by 2030 we would have 2,500 units, the city has had at least 6, 7, 8 housing projects that went through. and we didn't get affordable housing. Let's take Willow Valley, for instance, and the houses that were there. Yet we had this goal set and a plan set and a strategic plan that we would produce so many affordable housings, but we approved all these programs without doing that. You mentioned Landis Valley. How many units are they proposing? Do you know?
I do. I believe it's 79
Right, and we're only
units.
talking about 5 of them being affordable.
Yeah, I'd like to clarify, though,
Okay.
the target for the number of units in 2015 did not have any target specifically for affordable housing. I know the City Alliance wants to change that metric at this point, but this is the first time we're setting a target for affordable units over the next 5 years.
Okay, and then we had Stadium Row. I'm not, because of timing, I'm just gonna mention them and not ask for an explanation behind them all. But we had Stadium Row, we have Redmond's, we have the old St. Joe's Hospital, which I think you talked about, College Avenue. We had the project that's by the bus station that's producing smaller units. We have the units that were by the Science Factory. And I mean, we got very little affordable housing out of all these projects that were approved by the city. And we're saying we want to take $5 million and set it aside for a strategic plan that's going to produce 2,000. And it's not making sense, it's not adding up. And I mean, we're saying we're caring about it, but everything that we're passing is not really addressing affordable housing. But that's just one comment. I have a couple questions that I needed to be answered. So we say that how you have up here that we are going to protect and improve 1,000 units. What does that look like? I mean, it sounds good to me. I think on this on the slide you had that we will protect and improve 1,000 affordable units. Here we go, existing low to moderate income units. How are we doing that?
For any of our HUD programs that we
Through HUD
receive,
money?
right, and we receive that money from HUD, and we have requirements to utilize that money on low to moderate income households. So any of the households that we apply that money to automatically fall in that category. Now, the estimate that I made is that, and the public will be able to see this in the strategy tomorrow, I have a table that makes estimates for the number of units. So for our lead program, we're looking to improve 700 units over the next 5 years. 460 units by LGH Penn Medicine. We're over 1,000 right there. I don't know if we want to count LGH.
So that protect and improve is including.
Hold on, sorry, I wasn't finished. And then the critical repair program, we're estimating that we do 200 units over the next 5 years as well. And then I have some other numbers in here related to some of our partner programs like SOE and Tenfold in terms of home rehab or improvements. So the idea is that that does bring us up over 1,000 units over the next 5 years.
Okay, and I just thought this plan was new things that was going to happen, that we were asking for money to improve new things, not necessarily counting what we already got money for. The lead paint money has already been given to the city. We know what areas of the city it addresses, what areas it does not address. You know, so the critical repair is something that's already existing.
This strategy is comprehensive, so it does include other funding sources as well besides ARPA. But I think the question before council, before the community is where do we want to put that ARPA funding into new projects and where do we want to expand programs that are working well?
Right, okay. Okay, the other question I had is the city, we talked about Marietta Avenue, is the city looking into doing housing now and buying housing and managing housing and owning housing? Or how is that project? I mean, you just said 338, I forget what the address was. Marietta Avenue that the city was looking to.
Chris, here, I got it. So that one is 838 Marietta Avenue.
838, thank you.
And, yeah, and that's not, and reasonable people can disagree on this, but the city itself is not in the business of owning and managing public housing. HDC, that's the? the
Yes.
HDC project there.
And
So-
I would also just add that we have the Lancaster City Housing Authority, we have SACA, we have Habitat
Right,
for
right.
Humanity, we have other partners that would be able to utilize the ARPA dollars to do more, to preserve more than they would otherwise be able to do with the limited dollars that they have, as well as looking at other potential partners, private partners, or other ideas from the community to support affordable housing
Right.
and this strategy.
Thank you, Mayor.
And I understood that. It was just that I think the way you put it up there, this was a city project.
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So for the conversion, you were talking about maybe getting 40 transitional units. And I'm just wondering, you use TLC and YWCA. I mean, where do you see them putting units? Do you see them buying another building and expanding units? I mean, you're just saying, we're looking at 40 additional. We know that that space is at capacity. So I'm wondering where you're thinking that's going to come.
Right, that's a great question. Our estimates, which I think could use additional analysis, but our understanding is we think that we need about 40 additional
Right.
transitional living units in the city that aren't fulfilled right now. So I think that's exactly the question, is how can we utilize a combination of funding sources to help achieve that goal. I think it's important to note here that most of the programs serving the homeless community are managed through county entities and Lanco My Home Coalition. So we would really see this as a partnership with the county and Lanco My Home. This isn't something the city could do on our own.
And I just add to that, that in both of those facilities, they're actually looking at reorganizing space to add more transitional units. The Y, I think, has a capital plan that they're launching that I think is adding a couple of dozen new units.
Okay, and then we have the homeowner protection. You said it was on one of your screens.
Yes.
What is that plan and how are you going to protect homeowners?
Yes, I had so much ground to cover today.
I know.
I'm sorry I couldn't go into all of the detail. It is in the strategy document, a couple more sentences. The homeownership protections is really related to expanding and exploring programs to help low-income homeowners stay in their homes as they age and build equity, such as low-interest home loans and facade improvement grants. So we're open to other ways to help with home ownership protections as well, but I was trying to offer a couple of program ideas that could be successful.
Okay. And the other thing that I did not see in the plan is that I don't see you talking much about home ownership. We're talking about units. Are they going to be condos that people are going to own? Are we kind of phasing out? There was a time when the city thought that strong neighborhoods came from, homeowner properties, homeowners owning their properties. And I know things are changing. So how is that fitting into this plan?
That's a great question. It's really both. I don't think we can abandon one for the other.
Right.
I think that building wealth and home ownership, particularly for our existing residents, particularly for residents of color, is really, really critical. Also recognize that the demand that we're seeing in the market is favoring rental at times, and that the composition of these households may actually lend themselves, in some cases, to other rental units, additional rental units. So I think we still need both. We still need to be working on both.
And right now, and I think we heard, I heard on Monday, you were talking about using home and CDBG monies. We know most of CDBG's money goes into the city's infrastructure, the streets and the paving. So how are you going to now stop using it for that and give it back to the community to use Home for Home and HUD?
In the latest 5-year consolidated plan that was passed by council, we had large categories that we would break the CDBG funding into. One of those big buckets is referred to as affordable housing solutions.
Right.
So we'll have a little bit of CDBG money for those purposes as well, but not at the level of ARPA, of the Rescue Act funding.
Right. And then my other comment would be, we are working on the comprehensive plan, and I'm trying to see where this plan is coming in at without all the information that we're gathering from people to, who's going to be addressing housing issues. And would this plan be able to change or be rewritten based on information that we get from the comprehensive plan and the engagement team? And if not, why are we voting on this now to set a plan when there's so much information with the new census data and all the engagement that we're doing in the city coming up with? Why wouldn't we wait till we got that information to come up with this plan?
We can, if we find new information or new ideas in the comp plan process, we can definitely meld the two. I would simply say that in the 2 years that I've been here, there have been so many engagement processes since we've been here. Through every engagement process, affordable housing is always the top or one of the top priorities. And this work took a level of depth in the housing space that wasn't, we weren't able to do all this work within the comp plan project itself.
Okay. And then my last question was, you talked about the low to moderate being like 45,000. Was that for the city? Being low income-wise?
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Mr. Delf was, he pointed out that what was 60% of the county's AMI, or median family income, is equal to the city's median income. So he was calling attention to the disparity between AMI guidelines for the county versus the
what
city.
the city has.
And so that 45,000 tracks about the median family income within the city of Lancaster, whereas taking the whole county, you actually find yourself in the mid-60s.
57, yeah.
Yep.
I think.
I am gonna, just because we've had a lovely 12 minutes, I'm gonna ask you to wrap it up, Darlene.
Yes, okay. Yeah, that's the only question I have for you, and I guess we'll get to speak on the ARP when that comes up.
Yeah, there is another agenda
Okay.
item. Yep,
Thank you.
thank you.
Council President, can I ask a clarifying question?
Of course.
Because I think it just got brought up. The reason why a lot of these initiatives within the strategic plan are potentially possible is because of new funding from ARPA that we're looking to invest, which is the $5 million, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so a lot of the additional fundings from critical repair program and the other programs will be in addition to the $5 million? Or would the $5 million be used for some of those programs?
We do have funding streams from HUD going to lead rehab and to critical repair. That protect area of the plan in particular is fairly well funded. However, if there's a program in there that we want to expand using ARPA funding, like critical repair, we could.
Gotcha, thank you.
Jessica Lopez, 437 East Marion Street. I was listening to your thing, and great work, whatever the case may be. But it seems to me as if we're trying to plug a hole in the Titanic. If 3.8% of our poverty, if 3.8% of our population is in poverty right now, and we're proposing another 300 properties in 5 years where we only have 1,000, and 3.8 is what, roughly about 15,000 people that are under poverty income limits right now. How does 300 apartments in the next 5 years help us? Like, I'm really, really confused by the way the math just isn't adding up. And when we're saying that a building of 76 apartments, we're only gonna add 5, we're only gonna force them to 5. What is the what's the word I'm looking for here? What's the rate? Yeah, not just the ratio, but how much are they gonna make off of these buildings while they're only giving us 5 apartments? And how is that really gonna help people when people are literally being tossed out in the streets every day, and we're watching it now that the housing crisis is the way it is? And if we're at 15,000 now, how bad do you think it's gonna be at the end of the year, at the middle of next year, when people are still going through this and people still aren't going back to work, and then we have people on strike and we have more people threatening to strike? I just don't see It just doesn't seem to me as if this is a suitable plan for our city with the way our income levels are, with the way our poverty levels are, and with the fact that we don't have nowhere near enough low-income housing as it is to be like, hey, we're gonna protect these 1,000 houses and then add another 300 in the next 5 years, even though we know about 3,000 people will be here within the next 5 years. And especially if we're giving half of our grants to people in the county to buy houses in the city. Like, it doesn't make sense to me. So I was just wondering if there's a way to force these contractors to add more low-income properties when they're trying to ask us for our COVID money.
Yes, and to answer your specific question, Jess, like yes and no, is that there is, there are things that we can explore in inclusionary zoning and in set-asides. But the other reality that we also face is that once we get past a certain point, we actually run afoul of what indeed is our legal power. And so we're looking at this. We proposed changes to the lead ordinance. We proposed some changes to the human relations ordinance. Was that a month ago? Was that last month?
The initial articulation of the changes, but we'll be having more conversation this month, November.
Yeah, on how evictions are evaluated and how landlords evaluate tenants, because we also see that as largely unfair. And that's just, it's a needle that has to be threaded, because on the other side, if they go to court and they say this is illegal, it's a violation of our property rights, and they win, then the whole thing gets knocked down. And so that's a thing that we have to balance. And I got to say, I agree with you. We are absolutely plugging a hole in the Titanic. And if somebody, if anybody's got like a free, like $300 million, if the county wants to shove us some of their $105 million, et cetera, we will take it and we will build and secure more homes with it, because this stuff is like, it is insanely expensive. And forgive me for rambling. I'm not counting this against your time, to be clear. When with the SACA projects, we were talking about like $310,000 to build a house. That's like what it costs to build a new house, and at a certain point, like you have to pay the cost of construction, even when you have nonprofit developers. There's not a nonprofit motive.
And that makes me wonder, though, because we've had a lot of projects going around here where they're expensive, excuse my language, expensive as condos that nobody can really afford unless they're moving from outside the city into the city. And my thing is, why aren't we forcing these contractors, these developers that are making millions of dollars off of our city annually with these condos, to provide low-income housing structures as well? If they're bidding on these contracts and they're gaining this capitalistic gain, why aren't we as a city enforcing that they have to do this as well? If you go to Tenfold, right, and you're homeless and you need assistance, in order to give you assistance, you have to provide them with your financial information for over a year so that you can prove that you deserve that help. Why aren't these people that are bidding to make millions off of us proving that they deserve to have our land?
So this is, at least that I've heard it, not uncommon in the feedback that we've gotten on the comprehensive plan. And that's where something like, the fancy word is like inclusionary zoning or a set aside, but that's exactly where that comes in. And so that's a process that we are, like, how to do that for the whole city and what those rules are is something that we're undertaking right now. As it stands, we can't force somebody to do something with a law that we don't have to date. And so, like, if you're saying to me, like, that is a law that we need heard, I don't disagree. So,
and I just want to propose to City Council that
please.
I'm not really sure exactly what the decision is that's going to be made here today in regards to this, but I believe that y'all should table it, and this should be a situation that goes on to the Engage Lancaster website, and this should be something that the entire city be included on, because this right here, and I'm not undermining the work that you've done on this, and it seems like it's extremely extensive, but it doesn't make sense. It's not adding up, and it's not going to be a solution that your city is going to be happy with.
But yes, and also we won't vote on it tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Counselor Smith-Waddell, if I may.
Of course.
Just to that point, that we are unable to compel developers to make that decision. The best we have right now is to give them incentives to do so. So it sounds like parts of this plan offer them additional incentives to do so. Is that right? Am I
That's right.
characterizing that correctly?
That's
Okay.
right. And I think and this may be a conversation for another time, but if you look at the inclusionary zoning best practices around the country, 15% of new housing units overall it may not meet the overall need, but in terms of the economics of the development, that is actually a very high standard compared to other cities around the country. If we're able to achieve 15% affordable units through incentives versus requirements, I think that it is a win. It's a partial win, understanding what we're up against, but it's an important win nonetheless.
Thank you, Councilor Bakay. Ms. Wilson.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Wilson. I'm the Executive Director for the Lancaster City Housing Authority. And I just want to speak on preservation. I appreciate new construction and what's taking place within the city, but as owner and manager of 565 properties throughout the city, and in which we house over 3,000 people, we also are very interested in preservation in the buildings that we house the lowest of the population in. So I just want to make that comment and want to make sure that we are in your thoughts as you're thinking about these ARPA dollars and the infrastructure that is much needed for the properties that we maintain and try to manage that are for over 70 years, that have been built in the 60s and 70s and are in need of major infrastructure improvements. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson.
May I ask Ms. Wilson a question? Ms. Wilson,
If you would like, Councilor Diaz would like to ask you a question.
in reference that you were discussing, because I know there's, it's right near, I think it's Edwards Washington School, the one near Ann Street that I know that Almanac. How old is that property? And I know that constantly there's people moving out to try to get it renovated or something of that nature. I know, is that the worst, or is there one that you would say we would be able to invest more on another project versus that one?
Thank you, Counselor. So what we're facing is a situation where we're just in major infrastructure improvement throughout all of our properties. When you mentioned Almanac, that's Franklin Terrace, buildings in a beautiful area, but haven't had, we're just now able to starting to get to replacing basics of kitchens and flooring. Within our towers, we have major pinhole leaks that, it's just, we can't grant ourselves enough, we can't go after enough grants to make these major improvements. So we have Franklin Terrace, Susquehanna Court, we have 95 single-family homes throughout the city, and then we have the two towers, Farnham Street East and Church Street. So Church Street and Farnham house our most vulnerable, our seniors. And the one thing I want to stress to everyone, everybody thinks about public housing and people who don't work. These are people who are working below the minimum wage. These are people who have retired in jobs where they made minimum wage all their life, so all they get now is Social Security. They don't have 401ks. They can't move downtown into the new high-rise. But we have that new high-rise downtown. You can't have that new beautiful building coming up in your neighborhood. Your neighbor towering building is going in shambles. So we must preserve what we already have.
Thank you so much. I am 100% with you.
Thank you.
And Paul Colbreth, 34 Landis Drive, Lancaster. One quick question. When and why did the program, the critical repair program, move from a grant program, HUD-funded grant program, to a loan program?
The critical repair program has always been a loan and grant program. It's eligible to be used in either way. And I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understand your question. you're asking, or you're suggesting it should be a grant program as
Yeah,
opposed?
it originally was a grant program.
Okay,
But now it's a loan program, and, loans require
payment
different
back. Right.
criteria.
Yes.
So why did it move from a grant to a loan?
My understanding, and I will double check this for you, but my understanding is it has been used in both ways in the past, as a loan and a grant program.
Okay, because I've known it as a grant program.
Okay.
And
May I?
I just heard that tonight.
Yeah, let me jump in here. So yeah, Paul, it has historically been both a grant and loan program, and part of what Mr. Delfs is talking about is, as part of our housing strategy, investing more funds to expand the portion of the program that goes to grants.
No. Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Tony, you're last up.
Okay. Tony Dasher, 700 block of New Holland Avenue. There's probably a lot I could question about or ask, but let me try and just stick to some major points. My first question is this PowerPoint going to be available to the public? Can we make it available on the website potentially?
Sure.
That would be great. Thank you. I want to target, I think, point 4, innovation. I didn't see a mention of air rights. Are we going to be taking any consideration towards the air rights and airspace in the city? Because something that has been on my mind is that wood construction, which is what a lot of developers use because it's a cheap, affordable way of construction, has a height capacity about 6 stories. That also is wood, and wood is likely to rot. And a lot of our older structures, I also expect to not necessarily be updated with the most modern equipment. I do believe there are spots in the city where we can build superstructures and potentially build on top of our already historic city. Is that something that going down the pipeline we are looking at or considering? Because I do frankly feel we missed an opportunity. There's someone who did have not $300 million, but $90 million of investment, and we have let a vision for a piece of property go forward that, as we can already visibly see tonight, there's some disagreement about whether or not that's something we want in our community. I think a lot of goals can be met if we approach situations in very innovative ways. That being said, wrapping up this specific question, is air right selling, air right development something that the city is willing to consider as part of the housing plan?
I'm not sure I understand the question about air rights.
So,
how do air rights differ from building above a particular parcel?
Okay, so let's just take a potential example. When you have, for example, a series of old historic structures, like maybe the 300 block of Queen Street, and you can no longer build on top of those because of, well, they're very old structures, they're not going to be able to support capacity. There is potential, though, that we have the site that used to be Zap & Co., and then we have a parking lot to the other side. I'm not an engineer. I don't know what the physics on this would be, but it seems to me that it's plausible that we can build a plaza over top of existing historic structures if those property owners are willing to sell off the right to development that exists above their property. This would be, this is not something I'm anticipating us spending this money on, but this is something that I do think we need to consider for the long, like centuries, 100 years long-term future planning of the city, because there is going to come a day when what we can't really get more of is land. So what?
No, it's a really innovative question, Tony. I would say at this point in time, most property owners, it's cost prohibitive to do that, and so they typically wouldn't pursue it. I think where we may be looking ahead some years, where we could possibly see air rights is over more like public infrastructure. So for example, if there's more density around the train station, there are places where they build above train tracks or other public infrastructure. So I know that we may be dreaming a little bit looking ahead,
Right.
but maybe down the line that could be feasible.
Okay, and then this will be what I kind of wrap things up on because there's so much that we could talk about. I think that I personally am not feeling super comfortable with giving $5 million to something that's fluid. I would feel much more comfortable as a community discussing specific projects. Like, I think 838 is a great, wonderful site, and we should be talking about acquiring and developing that. I have concerns personally about just saying, hey, $5 million to this proposal of a plan, which could change. That all aside, I think the city, as far as a housing opportunity and using the rail line, is an amazing opportunity because it's been a conversation in the past of having another train station in Lancaster located at Park City. Is the city going to consider opening up a conversation with property owners around Park City and those parking lots to consider infill development so that we can put housing right beside commerce?
That's already happened.
It's already happened. So what have those conversations been like?
It's a conversation that was presented to the new owners of Park City, and it's up to them what they do because it's their private property. And I don't know what's come of it. We haven't had further conversation, but that is a brilliant idea, and it is something that others have been talking about in terms of what to do with the future of malls in America. And you can see some of that, some of those things that are happening from a development perspective across the country. Obviously, it's not happening here yet, but it is something that I'm really intrigued by.
When was the last, because I understand that the property owners need to be responsive in these procedures. When was the last time we approached them about such a plan?
Tony, all things ended on March 13th. So like all of this stuff is just kicking in again in terms of COVID and all of that. So I haven't had a conversation about this since beginning of COVID.
Okay. Thank you very much for your time. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dastra.
Hi, one quick question. Tate Gray from South Ann Street.
Yep, go ahead, man.
Quick question is, on one of your slides you had about reduced parking.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Ted Gray.
Ted Gray. And what's the 100 block you live on, man?
200.
200 South Ann. Thank you. Thank you. Please continue.
Yes. He had about reduced parking. Okay. We already have parking problem. I know that I was in one of the meetings on regards to parking. And so with reduced parking, I thought that when you build a home, you had to have parking for it.
Right. In the zoning code, there's a required amount of parking for any new building. My suggestion here is not a reduction in parking across the board, but in specific targeted areas that we have reduced parking requirements when you're next to a transit hub like the train station, for example. But for those buildings that are in primarily residential neighborhoods, that yes, we'd have to be very careful about that because there are impacts. There are absolutely impacts.
So no, it's not reduced. We're not reducing parking. It's just.
This is something that we'll figure out through the comprehensive plan process, but the proposal here, just the idea here is not to reduce parking across the board. It would be to reduce parking just in specific targeted areas.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Mr. Gray. Councilor Diaz? I think we're,
Willie Shell, 200 block South Marshall Street. Question I want to ask a couple questions is that in your comprehensive plan, you say you have 2,000 units that is allocated for 3% of low percent housing over the next 5 years?
15%.
Right.
15%.
The interim strategy,
which is like 3% per year out of 2,000.
We're looking at the whole 5 years as a total, and it's just a policy target and aspiration. So the hope is that we would produce a total of 2,000 units, and 15% of those units would be affordable, designated affordable.
The other question that I have is that out of 2,000 housing and 3% of that for low income, that's amount to a lower number like 105, what is that percentage per out of each per year? How many housing that you expect to rent out to low income?
At this point, we're not setting a target each year. We're hoping to achieve those 2,000 units over the 5-year period. I mean, if we divide that by 5.
Talking about 60 units a year, but the thing is that, like,
60.
if you set down to build 300 units of affordable housing and you go through land development and you actually build the thing, you get no units in the first 2 years, and then they all come online in the 3rd and 4th year. So it's not broken out like year by year by year by year by year.
My other question is that as I sit here and listen that all of these projects is going to take place on the Northeast, as far as College Avenue, Marietta Avenue, is there any plan for the Southeast, and the Southwest in this plan? I heard nothing concerning that building, even trying to bring into these businessmen to do anything in the South Side and the North.
The strategy is intended to be focused on all 4 quadrants of the city. One element that we talk about in the beginning of the strategy is the importance of making sure that we have affordable units in all parts of the city. So, for example, the 213 College Avenue project, I see that as a big win because we're creating affordable units in the wealthiest part of the city. In addition to that, we do have projects like homeownership projects that have been focused in the South. So, for example, the Conestoga North project that we've talked about, SACA's Conestoga North project, is a creation of 9 new homeownership units in the South, just as an example. So there are a lot of different types of projects, and the intent is to focus on all parts of the city.
Is any of your slides up there say anything concerning the Southeast?
So, I mean, I'll just clarify that 838, the housing strategy is in generalities, and this is not targeting specific projects. I believe Director Delfs included 838 Marietta as an example of a project, but we have a number of projects that have been that people have reached out to council and the mayor's office all across the city, in the Southwest and the Southeast, including the plan from, I can see Darlene over there, including the plan from South End Concerned Neighbors, and we're looking forward to hearing about how that is also going to dovetail with home ownership. That the need for affordable housing is in every quadrant of the city is not lost on us. I think the design of 838 is to not say, okay, we are only going to build affordable housing and stick it where Black and brown people are, because that's all we think that's where affordable housing goes. And frankly, the Northwest, where I grew up, with all of its neighborhood wealth and whatnot, could stand to have some affordable housing smack dab in the middle of it. That's just my thinking. But sorry, I'm very soapboxy today. I'm gonna shut up. Please continue.
That's all right, but Mr. President, I'm very aware of the city. I guess in all parts of the city, I know exactly where you live and everyone else in the city here live. So that I'm very aware of that. And 838 Merritt Avenue, is that city property? Is that city limit?
Yeah, I think that's the last block of Marietta that's entirely within the city limits.
Okay. So that's not in the Southeast, that's not in the South. Southwest.
That is
That's
just
in,
one example project.
that's
So-
just, well, in 213 College Avenue, that's not in the Southeast.
Oh, yeah, so this is actually helpful
So
to clarify, like
my-
213 College Avenue and 838 Marietta are,
that's,
they're next to
uh,
each other. They're
right.
like, they're the same developer.
That's
Yeah.
Old St. Joe Hospital.
Yeah.
Right. So right. So that's not new money going into the Southeast. That's not new money. Right. It's part of a project as far as building houses in the Southeast for a low-income family as well. Which, if we was looking at any project in the Southeast for low-income family, okay, as well as helping those, a lot of the landlords and so forth that are already there are trying to rebuild, remodel, and restore the homes, okay, for low income. So, as I heard you say earlier, that despite you're not voting on this, right, but there is I think this plan really need to be really looked over before that even you consider it as far as well as allocating $5 million to any project. Thank you.
Fair enough, Reverend, thank you. I just also want to clarify that this is the interim housing strategy, and that, as the Reverend did mention, the allocation is targeting specific projects, where this is just a general approach that the city administration is proposing to take. Yes, Joey, you don't have to sneak.
Joey
Mr.
Dashka, 100 block in North Plum Street. I will keep this quick. I got 2 questions for you. One, I believe it was at the end of the analysis portion where it was mentioned that the city is limited in its power to do things around housing. I just wanted to ask what some of those limitations are. Are they purely fiscal? Are they legislative? Or a combination of both? Is there anything specific you guys would like to see changed?
Yeah, actually.
You got time?
This is
I
actually
got
one
as
of my
much time
favorite,
as you have.
one of my favorite things to talk about. And I'm going to try not to take too long, but this is all I'm doing tonight, though I understand other people may have other places to go. So I would say one of the biggest limits is in terms of the legal actions we can take, which are considered within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania as infringing on the property rights of an individual landlord. Sorry. Infringing on the property rights of an individual landlord or property owner. And so, for example, there's a fairly high bar to seizing and repossessing properties. There's no legal space in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for a third-class city to enact rent freezes or rent control or even rent scaling to say, like, you can't increase your rent more than X amount per month. Like I said, we're exploring what we have the legal capacity to do in terms of how landlords consider tenants. How long can a landlord, like a big beef for me is, I got evicted when I was in college, right? And there are thousands and thousands of city residents who are basically disqualified from rental applications because they have an eviction. And I think that we should say that, after a certain number of years, that's simply not a matter that should be relevant. But we can only push those things up to a certain point, and those things are limited. Our legal powers there are limited because at a certain point, the Commonwealth considers us to be infringing on the property rights of the landowner. The fiscal limitations are just that, like, man, building housing is like, it's expensive. And that, like, we're talking about a $5 million allocation, which will not be the last ARPA allocation to affordable housing. And we put in $2.5 million, like, in home dollars, and we're putting $11.1 million into lead remediation. And all told, we might spend $50-60 million, and I hope, yeah, sorry. And truth be told, the cost of things is just such that that will not be as much new or protected housing as we want it to be. And so, and shout out the city's grant writer among others, because we do have to scrape for all of these sources of money to start making progress here. And I want to acknowledge that, like, we have to hold the thing in both hands, that like this is more than we've ever done, and accept the reality that it still may not be enough, but that's not going to stop us from trying. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, second question. I believe it was like the first slide of the strategy portion, and I just don't want to misquote you. Okay, yeah.
Is it the
that one?
The overarching? Yes.
Yeah. The city will facilitate the creation of 2,000 new housing units with the goal of at least 15% affordable. As you said at the beginning, affordable is relative.
Yes.
So affordable for who? Because I think that a lot of the sentiment that's being expressed is that we use the term affordable a lot, but that delivery isn't happening for a lot of folks that are looking forward to that.
Yeah.
And then also follow up, in the strategy that what you said you're going to upload to the city website tomorrow, is that this exactly or more in depth?
I have 3 documents that we can upload tomorrow. One is the study document by the Center for Regional Analysis. One is the strategy document. And then also we had a request to upload the presentation, which I'd be happy to do as well.
Okay. Yeah, because my follow-up to that then is, what does the other 85% of these units look like in terms of cost? Because I understand that it is a free market sort of thing, housing development. But if the other 85% of these units are way above the affordable rate, what's really the point of only having 15%?
If we're looking at the definition as 60% AMI or less, that would be in the 15. If we're talking about rental units, if we're talking about 60% AMI or less, that's the 15% affordable. I think what is buried in this statement here is that the creation of additional units, private market rate units, increases the supply in the city and also has a beneficial effect on the overall price level in the city. So we do need affordable housing that is designated for low to moderate income residents. I would never say, personally, I would never say the market will take care of itself in this particular instance. However, we have low vacancy and a tight market, which means that it is pushing prices up and it is causing incentives for landlords to hold down the quality of existing units. So having market rate units as part of the supply is also an important part of affordability writ large across the board. So that's why we've talked so much about supply.
And I just want to underscore that there's no conversation or proposal that any of the ARPA dollars or any tax dollars are going into market rate units, period.
Beautiful.
What we are trying to accomplish is to, in a way, leverage the private market with subsidy to provide more affordable units than would otherwise exist without the subsidy. And so the whole point of this is to get as much as we can out of $40 million, knowing that $40 million at $310,000 a unit would not go very far. And so we can go out and use $39.5 million and go build a building or 2 or maybe 3. That's not going to get us as far in terms of the number of units that we are trying to accomplish over time. And so we're trying to think about how we're layering all of these monies and programs together into this bigger plan that is focused on all of the city, recognizing that one tool is not going to do it.
And if I may, just very quickly, thank you, Mayor, for calling that out, because even the market rate projects that play a role We're just talking about public subsidy for the affordable units. So reiterating what the mayor said, plus this interim housing strategy, the development of this strategy happened months ago, the start of it, before we even knew about the ARPA allocation. So we have been trying to come up with a game plan for creating the most affordable housing most effectively. Then we got the happy news about the ARPA allocation and realized that we may be able to allocate additional money and supercharge some of these efforts. So even though we're trying to pair the two together, the strategy has been in development for quite some time because we've known how important this issue is.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all.
Thank you, Joey.
Sorry, Jessica Lopez, 437 East Marion Street. Quick question though, and nobody's touched on it. When you mentioned those tiny homes, my question is, what's your plan with those tiny homes? Is it gonna be in a selected area, or are they gonna be spread throughout the city? Because as they've been proposing these in different environments, we've been seeing the outcourse of what these communities of tiny homes end up being, and it's ghettos. We're just gonna call it what it is. So is it gonna be spread throughout the city? Or are the, like, you know, tiny home on this block, tiny home on that block, or is it gonna be a community of tiny homes?
This effort so far has been driven by individual property owners or those interested in rehabilitation. This is just the first one in the city, but I take your point. It's a good one. And I think that's why it's very important that we're applying the various building codes and planning and land development codes to the process. So in this case, there were commissions that looked at it carefully.
No, I met the people, because I did meet the people who own that tiny home. I walked past it one day and was like, oh shit. But like I never seen it there before. Like, where did this pop out of? So I met the people who owned it. But my concern is that if, you know, eventually down the line in this plan, with these tiny homes included, that it is going to become a poverty-stricken community of tiny homes that represents what it's been representing in California, what it's been representing in other environments that have already tried this.
Yeah, I think it's a fair point in terms of building a community of tiny homes, and that's not really what we're suggesting, and it's obviously not right for everyone. And it is also sort of this idea around accessory dwelling units, and we have been approached about creating accessory dwelling units on a property where there is a person that owns the property who has a fixed income, that could provide some supplemental income that could, you know, basically help them stay in their homes. And so there's a lot of different, I just want to underscore, this is a housing strategy. We're going to need to take these projects and the ideas that are going to come over this year, next year, the following year, all into consideration. I think what we're most interested in the feedback, what I'm most interested in the feedback is directionally. Are we going in a direction where we're adding more affordable units? And are the things that we're including in terms of the 5 goals, are they directionally where the city wants to go? And if that is the case, because it is important to me that we actually commit funds to make these things happen, because we have, all of us, I think I can speak for council, and many people in this room, if not everybody, has said affordable housing is such a need and such a priority. And so we have done months of analysis. We're continuing the analysis. We've created this plan. And I think that there are opportunities that are coming in terms of how to add more affordable housing. And tiny homes may be one part of it. And, you know, it may get to the end of, you know, this project, this process, and nobody's up for it. And that's okay.
Understandable. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess.
Man.
Yes. I'm going to have you wrap it up.
Okay.
You're the last one. Thank you.
My name is Whitney Davis, and I'm at the 500 block of Persian Avenue.
Okay.
I just want to make a little comment of saying that as we build and create and toss ideas around with this project, to consider the reduced parking requirements because it's a big deal. I came here specifically to speak on the parking issue, and I didn't realize how important parking was until I became a homeowner. I own my house on the 500 block of Persian, and it is a parking disaster around there. So I don't think it's very adequate to just jump to reducing parking because it's more like a rob Peter to pay Paul kind of situation. And the person who pays the most is the residents because we deal with ticketing, car issues, everything like that. So, as you're creating the affordable housing and in different areas, and I agree, everyone everywhere can use a little bit of affordable housing. So it's fair to distribute these places throughout the community, throughout the city of Lancaster. But just remembering not to take too much from the people that are already there or are people of the future because we're growing and increasing and not, getting smaller. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Diaz.
Question.
Yes.
Okay, so providing funding for other projects and services consistent with the purpose of set forth and above, okay? This is part of this bill. So can you go back and draw something else that's going to include, as Mrs. Wilson said, because she's right. We're going to build, but then these other units are deteriorating, so that's a loss of people living in these buildings. So what can you do to make sure that we're including and finding out how much is that project going to cost in order to be inclusive, not only to add units, but also to fix units that are later on going to wind up not existing?
If I can, Councilor Diaz, great question, and I believe that the Lancaster City Housing Authority is in the process of working on that. We've invited that. We understand that the Lancaster City Housing Authority has been a partner in the city for 70 years. We want to support those efforts, and that is part of the Protect strategy, and we are having those conversations. So this is again to the question before us about the process and the Economic Development Committee or Community Development, and this is for council to determine the process in which each of these projects is going to run. What you're referring to in terms of the specific ordinance that we're going to get to, I'm going to hold further comment until we get to that item on the agenda. Okay?
Mayor, if I may very, very briefly, I think it's a very important question, and I appreciate Ms. Wilson's comments as well. I elected to use the term here for goal number 2, protect, instead of preserve, because often that term preserve is linked to historic preservation. But we are talking in this category here about protecting and improving low to moderate income units, and that could include units that are part of the housing authority's portfolio. For example, some of the home funding that we allocated this past year went to a handful of units to the housing authority's nonprofit Partners with Purpose. So using the term preserving affordable housing goes hand in hand with this, but I just wanted to note that it was a language choice here to use the term protect as opposed to preserve.
Thank you.
Okay, loved that. Oh, wait, that sounds sarcastic. Not being sarcastic. That's what these meetings are for. Thank you all very much. We now move to Title 8, reports of committees of council meetings held on October 4th, 2021. If you'll all bear with me for a minute, I will be reporting for Councilors Garcia Molina and Soto as they are not here this evening. I'm just going to pull up the minutes. Oh, and I'm so sorry. Thank you very much, Director Delfs, for all of your hard work. Thank you, Naomi. It's much appreciated. Yep, and pass our thanks on to your department. Did public safety meet?
I don't think they
Okay,
did.
so my error. Public safety does not appear to have met last week. The Public Works Committee did meet at the committee meeting to consider Administration Bill number 21, 2021, which would amend the streets and sidewalks and vehicle and traffic ordinances, which is sent for first reading at this meeting. And Director Stephen Campbell, hey Steve, elaborated on what some of our proposed plans were to improve and make more effective both the actual street sweeping and clearing of snow after in a significant weather event, and improving the resident experience, both in terms of the actual sweeping and in terms of the signage. And there was some public engagement on that front. And we'll be seeing that if you have an agenda, you can see it's under B, ordinances for first reading, when we get down there. That concludes the report of the Public Works Committee. And I will now pass it to Councilor Arroyo for a report on the Economic Development Committee.
Thank you, Council President. The Economic Development Committee did meet during the last committee meeting to discuss Council Resolution 20, Council Resolution number 57, 2021, of recognizing Fair Trade Month, which we presented earlier today. And that concludes the report for the Economic Development Committee.
Thank you, Councilor. Finance, Councilor Baker.
Thank you, Council President. During the October 4th Finance Committee meeting, we discussed two resolutions that will come up later this evening, Resolutions 54 and 55 of 2021, that both amend capital improvement plans to the 2016A and 2018 bonds, respectively. The reallocation of remaining funds from completed capital improvement projects and unallocated funds will go toward projects like the East King Street Fire Station, Ewell Plaza construction and stormwater, and continuation of the Christian Street Bikeway, and also about $1 million for street repaving. We also discussed Bill number 22 of 2021, which is on our agenda for first reading this evening. This bill proposes the appropriation of $5 million of American Rescue Act funds to be allocated for affordable housing projects. Tonight we heard the interim housing strategy that will be used to guide the spending of these funds, and we'll also hear about some additional projects that will be used for some of these dollars more immediately. Again, this is a first reading this evening, and no vote will be taken tonight. That concludes my report, Council President.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Arroyo, can you report on community planning?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Council President. The Community Planning Committee did meet during the last committee session as well to discuss Administration Resolution number 53, 2021, which was authorizing a joint application with the Lancaster Public Library for the Keystone Grant. That will be discussed later today for a first reading, I believe. We did have Jamie Hall, which is the Director of the Donor Relations for Lancaster Public Library, present to us regarding the $750,000 grant request, and more to that come later on in the agenda. And that concludes the report.
Thank you, Councilor. And Personnel, Councilor Diaz.
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. The Personnel Committee met October 4th and reviewed the following nominations. Danielle Kepling shall be appointed to the Historical Commission. Shelby Elmar for the appointment of the Historical Architectural Review Board, and Amanda Lehman for the reappointment of the Airport Authority. And approval of these appointments is on the legislation agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. And on that subject, we now move to our legislative agenda, where we begin with nominations for appointment. Councilor Diaz.
Yes, so at this time, I'd like to make a nomination to the appointments, Danielle Kepling to the Historical Commission to complete an unfinished term ending December 31st, 2022. Shelby Lamar to Historical Architectural Review Board to fill in the vacancy position until January 1, 2024. And Amanda Lehman to the Airport Authority for the second term from December 31st, 2021 through December 31st, 2026.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Council comment on the appointments.
None of them are here.
Any comment from the public on those 3 appointments? Hearing none, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Arroyo.
Aye.
Ms. Baker.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
And President Smith-Waddell.
Aye.
And that is all we have.
Great, thank you. That moves us to subheading B, ordinances for first reading, Administration Bill number 21, 2021.
An ordinance of the Council of the City of Lancaster, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, amending sections 26221 and 28586 of the Code of the City of Lancaster, and rescinding and repealing sections 28590, 91, and 94 of the Code of the City of Lancaster to redefine those terms, to clarify and provide that street cleaning, street sweeping regulations apply to snow clearing from such spaces, and that the alternate side of the street, parking during street cleaning will not be authorized when street cleaning as newly defined is implemented, providing for the severability of the ordinance, providing for the repeal of the inconsistent ordinances, and providing that the ordinance will take effect in accordance with Pennsylvania law. The first reading, Mr. President.
Thank you. Not needing a motion or a second, I will ask Mr. Campbell. Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
I think it's the other side.
Thank you very much, council members. This is just a quick review of what was presented at both committee meetings as a way of showing that we've made a couple of adjustments to the proposed legislation so that it reflects and responds to some of the concerns that had been raised before. So, just as a quick reminder, the purpose of the proposed legislation is to address the problem of making sure that the streets can be cleaned not only during conventional cleaning purposes, but during snow cleaning in particular, and to address some of the challenges that we encountered in order to make that work for all of us. So it's cleaning streets after snowfall, the ability to make repairs in the public right-of-way, and to provide less inconvenience to the parking challenges in front of us. Oops. Sorry. There are 6 areas where we're proposing what I hope are considered minor changes to the current regulations. The current regulations are silent on how we resume cleaning after a snow emergency. We need to expand street cleaning to mean maintenance for snow cleaning and repairs, not just for cleaning. We need to, the restrictions on parking for opposite side needs clarity and a means of enforcement, and we're proposing that that particular provision be rescinded because we are amending the following provision related to narrow streets so that we can utilize, we can get people to park directly after the streets have been swept easily and within the regulation. We want to be able to commit that we will use the opposite side of the street parking period to do periodic repairs or upgrades or pruning of trees, et cetera, and therefore tapping into the posting of signs provision in section 285-93, and we needed to codify that basic practices are not exemptions, but are the norm. So just very quickly, to not take up a lot of time, The proposed regulation 262-21 is currently silent on how to resume cleaning after snow emergency. So we're proposing adding a third section. The first section talks about closing when you bring a snow emergency into effect. Provision B talks about how you end it. The section that we're proposing to add describes how we use how do we resume the cleaning operation. So commencing at an hour declared by the mayor that the snow emergency regulations are no longer in effect, all parking restrictions regarding street cleaning referenced in Article 9 shall be reinstituted and be in full force and effect to assure that the city may clean and clear all such streets of snow, including areas on such streets designated for parking. So this means that you either have a situation where the street cleaning issues are in effect or they are not because of a snow emergency. The next part of the next regulation for amendment is to expand the street cleaning to mean maintenance for snow cleaning and repairs. The current reg stops at the first paragraph. Street sweeping maps shall be prepared and maintained by the director, et cetera, and distributed to the members of the council and filed with council. We would amend and add the following: that for purposes of this chapter of the code, street sweeping and street cleaning shall include cleaning or sweeping of the streets of any debris, trash, refuse, leaves, and snow. Any and all signs promulgated restricting parking for purposes of street cleaning shall, without making further changes, be in effect, which is to say that we do not need to change all of the signage, all of the existing signage that refers to street maintenance or street cleaning will in effect also refer to snow clearance. The third, this is a piece, this provision and provision 91 are a bit confusing. They talk about how during street cleaning, you can move your car to the opposite side of the street and then move your car back after the street sweeper has gone by. We want that to be the case, but this provision sets a situation up that is problematic for DPW and for the public, which means that people can park on the opposite side of a narrow street and obstruct traffic, as well as obstruct the passage of a street cleaning vehicle. So what is proposed here is that this provision, which has some complications to it, be removed entirely, be rescinded and repealed, and that the next provision, which is currently saying, except as provided in the case of narrow streets, be amended so that all other streets, parking on other streets may be resumed prior to the prescribed times if the section of the street involved has been swept on that day. That is to say that we are committed, we as DPW are committed to being able to clean the streets, and when our street sweepers have gone by, if we do not have signage up saying that we're going to be using that street for other repair purposes, once the street sweeper goes by on any street, people can resume parking on the place that has been vacated by the street sweeper. This is our commitment that we will be posting signs when we do want to use the full street sweeping window to do repairs, upgrades, or work with the utilities to make adjustments and repairs to the street. So it currently had this other wording. We're saying that we shall post signs limiting parking as set forth and required by this chapter. And last but certainly not least, in order to reestablish the idea that except for during a declared snow or weather emergency, street cleaning regulations will be in effect, we're proposing rescinding and repealing the provision that says that this shall not apply at times when the streets are covered with snow, It's basically creating a series of exceptions that can be confusing. We want to make it an absolute that unless we are declaring a snow emergency or a weather emergency, you as the public can fully expect that we are in the process of cleaning the streets as per the regular schedule posted in the signage. So that means that this particular provision gets rescinded. The other slides that I have are basically explanatory of why these things are somewhat important, but this is in essence the core of the proposed regulation.
Thank you, Director Campbell. Council. The public?
Hello, Whitney Davis, 563 Persian Avenue. I want to know why, like a bigger picture of why we are doing this, because it pretty much seems like we're already doing this. Like people usually move their cars when they need to clean, when you guys need to clean the roads, or, you know, everyone chips in and shovels. So basically you're taking that responsibility off the community then with allotting this time frame of using the full, what is it usually, like 2 hours that we take away from the residents for the street cleaner to come by and do their job?
I think you're asking a very, very good question. The reason that we're trying to make these changes is several-fold. One, we discovered that with improved communication during this last winter, we were able to significantly not only improve the way that we were able to clear the streets of snow, but also drastically reduced the number of cars that were towed and the number of people who were ticketed. We also want to do, the second reason is we want to do better coordination of the work, of DPW work in the windows that we're already claiming. As you say, we're already claiming these windows of time, but what usually happens now is that we have not been coordinating, or not necessarily been coordinating, that if we need to do special work or pruning of trees or coordination with the utilities, that we're utilizing the time that's already designated every 2 weeks across the city to make some of that work happen. And the third part is that we basically have put, that the current regulations basically put a stop or a blanket, if you will, on movement of cars during certain periods that are not necessary. Once the street is clear, if we're not planning to use that street for any other purpose, there's no reason why you should be prohibited from moving back to the parking space. Now, we recognize that technically some of these things are on the books and some things have just not been enforced, partly because we do not have the staff nor in many ways the desire, nor in some cases enough parking to be able to enforce correctly. But this in many ways puts many more of those parking spaces back into availability a bit sooner, and sets up an expectation, if you will, a partnership between the city and the public, that when we intend to use the public right-of-way for particular purposes, we are working with you, we're notifying you, we're putting up signage in particular that says you are restricted from using this street in this period, and when the signs come down, it's back to normal. So
You're proposing like the paper temporary signs just up. How much of a cushion would we have as residents? Because it's really important. I know with the parking now, like I myself sometimes have to double park, and I feel like it's a double jeopardy because I have half of my block to park on, and then I can only, like when I do use the other half to quickly, like for instance, I just recovered from surgery. During my time of surgery, I got tickets when I had to double park just to be able to carry my groceries in the house. And the parking authority, they don't want to hear the stories, and they're tired of hearing the stories, and I'm sure the district justices as well, but you need to hear the stories to know what's going on and be able to communicate as the city with the residents and find a happy medium, and not just hitting us with tickets because I pay property taxes to do some of this construction for the street, you know, and then on top of that, I can't even use half of my block, and then on top of that, I'm getting tickets for street cleaning. In the southeast area, the street cleaning does not come when it's supposed to come, and in that window, so then you finally park again, and then boom, now they decided to come, or they're coming 3 weeks in a row, and it's hard to keep up with. I lose my keys, I lose my car almost every single day. It's frustrating. I never thought that parking would consume this much of me, you know, where for the first 30-something years of my life, or 15, I would say, my driving life, all I had to do was get out. I usually had a parking space in front of my house or around the corner, but that's not the case anymore. And I'm a homeowner with a 30-year mortgage. You know, what am I supposed to do for the next 30 years when, you know, if you impose these things like taking away the double parking, we should be able to double park. Where else are we gonna park? And then you're taking multiple blocks at the same time away. So where are we supposed to go when we already have nowhere to go? Because also in the area, there's permit parking. So I'm gridlocked in. What do we do about that? Because these are not minor changes. For someone that is living in this neighborhood, it's not minor changes, it's big deal stuff.
So you're making some very, very important issues, and we do recognize that this means, in some cases, some culture changes here. Our primary goal is to ensure that the streets are clear, whether it's that they're clear in case of snow, in case of debris when it's not snowing, but also clear of vehicles and traffic so that not only emergency vehicles can pass through those streets, but that people can get to where they need to be able to go. The cushion that you would have, and I know it's not a perfect solution, but the cushion you would have is that if it is the case that that window closes and the street sweeper has not gone by, you are able to resume, to go back to where you were before. If you do see the street sweeper, even though it's not necessarily the most wonderful thing in the world, you'd be able to follow the street sweeper and slip right back into your parking space directly after the street sweeper goes by.
If I could just ask a clarifying question, Ms. Davis. I want to make sure that I'm understanding how you're understanding this as a loss of parking. This doesn't have anything to do with double parking. And I know your block of 500 block of Pershing, and I know there's only parking on one side. And I know that there's oftentimes cars parked up on the sidewalk and things like that. What my understanding of this is that there's no more tickets if you park in the window that street sweepers are supposed to be there. If the street sweeper's already gone through, then park again. And so that's eliminating that. The other thing that it eliminates is that when we get a lot of snow, you know how narrow those streets get. They get even more narrow, and you're climbing over piles of snow and whatever. If you're not on the fortune of living on a snow emergency route where you get plowed curb to curb, this ordinance would basically say, if it's a street sweeping day, we're going to come and plow the snow so that you can, so there's more parking that's available.
Right, and that was what I was asking you when I was saying, how is this going to benefit the residents? Because we're committing to taking, where you guys are committing to taking that burden off of us, that you're telling us, okay, in this time I'm going to come by and clean the snow as soon as possible to the best of our abilities, because, you know, I know there's probably gripes for the workers of DPW, but there's gripes as a resident as well, you know, and it is a loss because now you're adding another responsibility for me as a resident to remember and take heed to. So it's like, okay, I can't just shovel out my spot anymore, me and my neighbors. Now I have to wait until the street cleaner comes, and it doesn't always come when it needs to come.
That is
I think
exactly right.
that's the part that's the third part, if you will, that yes, when the snow emergency is declared completed, that this is the end of the snow emergency, if that snow emergency end is declared on Wednesday night and your regular street sweeping day is Thursday, then the expectation is that you will have to find a way, and there's things that we're going to have to deal with to move your car out so that we can clean the parking lanes in the street sweeping, on the street sweeping day. So just as this map shows, for instance, one particular zone, if you are lucky enough that the snow emergency was lifted the night before, then your zone, if that day after is your zone for street sweeping, it's your zone for clearing the parking lanes as well.
Right, but we're not, you're speaking about luck, and luck does not provide me with a parking spot. You know, I'm hoping, you know, but we cannot say if I'm one of the lucky ones, because I'm not one of the lucky ones. And then there's, on my block alone, like just today I went around, because I did have a little bit of a misconception about what today's meeting was, but it still is very relevant. And I got signatures today from 60 people in the community just today in 3 hours about the stressors we have with the parking and the issues that are created. And there was some ideas that were put on here as well, if you would like to look over them, since that
I would
is
very much
your
like to.
responsibility. You know, but it's basically, where do we go when we already have nowhere to go? How are you going to communicate with the community so that everybody's on the same page and same understanding about a problem that is already a problem? And for DPW, I understand that it would be a solution, but as a resident, it's not a solution. It's actually creating more of a problem.
So part of the problem that is created if we don't take action is that rather than within 8 working days of a snowfall, all of the parking lanes being clear, is that can extend for 2 or 3 weeks, because we will not, we will not have been able to get in there to clear out the streets and make more parking available. 1/8 of the city every day would become more available for parking by being this aggressive.
By the city taking it into their hands to use your machines and
Yes.
get into the neighborhoods, and I understand that. So it's just like, what was I gonna say? You had a point, you were saying, okay, getting the city in and getting in, but why, so what's the thing, like, why do you guys want to take away the ability to double park? That is what I don't understand, because even when we do street cleaning, it's usually one side is one day and the next, coming back up is the next day. So with the snowfall, this is what I was trying to get to. What if I'm not the one? What if the snowfall doesn't stop till Thursday morning and during my window, and I miss my window, but I'm on Pershing Avenue and I have half of a block that the street cleaner did come and clean, and now I can double park on that side until whichever day the DPW gets back around to cleaning my block, because we missed the designated time frame.
So there's 2 things which are perhaps nuances of the understanding. One thing is that when we have cleared the street from snow, we're clearing the travel lane.
Right.
And we're not clearing more than the travel lane unless it is the street cleaning day or the street cleaning day, so that we can clear the snow from the parking lane. So when you're double parking, you're actually partly in the travel lane, which is impeding traffic. It's impeding ambulances or emergency vehicles from being able to go by. It's impeding school buses or you being able to go up and down your street to get your groceries delivered or anything like that. So what we need is to be able to have the streets clear, that what you're calling the double parking and the natural desire to say, let me just inch myself over the curb a little bit on the other side, is narrowing what is already a narrow street during the snow.
Right, and okay, so I understand for the snow, but then what about construction days, as you were speaking about, you know, where do we put 60 houses worth of people and vehicles where we already don't have that, and then how are you going to communicate better with the residents? Because that's my main concern. I want to know, how am I going to avoid getting tickets, basically, is what I'm saying out of this, and not have to park 4 or 5 blocks away from my house with 2 little kids that I have to make sure get in safe, and I'm a single mom, and it's dark, and I'm in a crime area and things of that nature. I want to make sure that I'm not ending myself in a worse situation, because when I go down to Jody Richardson's office and I tell her what I'm telling you guys, there's not really much I can do for you, or maybe I can do a little bit for you, or this time I can do, but then what about when I go back home in the upcoming weeks? The tickets are the frustrating thing, and the distance that we have to walk as residents in this area.
So I do think that you're going to have a shorter period of time where you're not going to be in that parking area. We will put the signs up the day before if we're going to use that street for its intended and already signed purpose. The signage already says that you're not to be parking, say, from 8:30 to 11.
Mm-hmm.
We're saying, if we're not planning to use that street for repairs or whatever, if the street sweeper goes by at 9 o'clock, you can park back there. If we are planning to use it for repairs, we're going to put up signage that says you may not be here for the entire period, those entire 2 or 3 hours that are already on the signs. So in all cases, you have more use or more access to the parking spaces than you would now. Right now, you have to hope and wish and pray that you don't need that space before the end of the window, because you could get ticketed before the end of the window.
Right.
We're saying now we reduce those chances for you to be ticketed, and if we do need to use that stretch of road, we're going to put up signage so that I cannot come back before the 11 o'clock or before the sign says I can come back.
Okay, well, can it be considered to have a bigger cushion than 24 hours for communicating with the community and posting that signage up? Because it's necessary sometimes. If you're out and about, you're really busy. So the time of when they put the signs up, sometimes they're doing it in the evening, and you wake up to these surprises.
So what I want people to understand, and I think it may take some messaging and some public service announcements,
Right.
is that the signage is still in effect. We are by ordinance saying that we're going to be very lax with it unless we actually need that stretch of street. But if you go to bed the night before and there has not been if there has not been signage up before the night before, usually we try to get it up at least 24 hours ahead of time, but I can't commit to any more than that. But if you go to bed and the signage is up saying that we're going to need it, you should expect that you won't be able to park back there until the end of that, either the end of that opposite side of the street parking period, or if it's some other extension, then the signage will say you can't come back until 3 o'clock in the afternoon or whatever time it would be. If, however, you leave late at night or leave in the morning and it does not have that signage, you have every right to expect that you can come back as soon as the sweeper's gone.
Director Delfs, if I may, Council President.
Yep.
I appreciate the public comment. I think this is a great opportunity that if there are these types of questions happening, maybe there's a meeting outside of this that we explore more. This is a first reading, so I think this is a great opportunity for more community engagement moving forward before passing the actual bill. So just wanted to throw that out there as an opportunity.
Very good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo.
Starting Bird, and I'm going to be really quick. I just, I'm here at the working session. I invited you, and I'm going to say it again publicly. Our neighborhood is willing to sit down and meet with you and talk about the concerns. Pershing Avenue is around the corner from me. I think you need to come up with some idea of where these people can park. You can't just tell them you can't park on your street all day, and there's nowhere for them to park. I know we said we got to work it out, but I think if you come and they may have some solutions as well. But you just can't tell people, you got Persian Avenue, you got Christian, you got North, and you got Locust. They all clean on the same days. And they're all one-side parking on one side of the street. Where are all those cars going to park? They're parked there all the time. And I think when we come to the meeting, you know, we need to, you talked about having some solutions, but I think before we pass this, if we're really trying to benefit the residents, we need to have some of them solutions in place. We need to have some answers for them. I do understand what the goal is, to clean the street from the snow, and that's excellent. But we cannot just leave our residents with nowhere to park. And permanent parking's coming. The mayor knows that. And if this, what I feel is this going to create more permanent parking. I know our block would say, oh no, people on Person Avenue come park on our block on street cleaning day. They're going to sign, you know, I've been trying to hold them off. I really don't want permanent parking on the block,
So
but it's coming.
As you may know, there's an informal moratorium on issuance of new permit RPP parking while we're moving forward to try to have the discussions about this. We had it, in fact, announced it at the Traffic Commission meeting. But we do want to be able to engage with the community about the potentials for the RPP and to be able to revisit that. We do believe that that RPP as it currently exists is an artificial restriction on where people can park and the needs that have to be met. So we have to address that.
So we're open if you want to set a meeting.
I'm very happy with that as well.
Bring our neighborhood together and meet with you.
I agree with you. When is the traffic commission meeting? The next one's in November. I forget what the date of the next traffic commission meeting is.
Amanda, would you answer that, and we'll get you an answer. Reverend Shell?
Yeah, I just also want to say about the parking, that when we look at parking, especially come down to Persian Avenue, Green Street, Shipping Street, Locust Street, those streets are very narrow. And even I get complaints every day about parking, and people just don't have nowhere to park. And then when you're talking about opposite side of the street and the city gonna put up signs and say you can't park here and you can't park there, then that's really pose a problem. And even with the permit parking, that's in effect. So when we're talking about limiting people for street cleaning, snow emergency, there has to be a plan in place so that people can have alternative to parking. And right now, if you go down Green Street, doing street cleaning, people park on the sidewalk so that the street cleaner can get down. And even in the wintertime, when you're talking about cleaning the street, and if the snow is too bad, people bank there's snow up between the cars. So then what are you saying, that you're going to have those people to move their cars, and where they're going to get parking from there when you got Persian Avenue is doing the same thing, you got Shipping Street is doing the same thing. So where do people park?
Right.
And these are the things that we have to be concerned about when it comes down to parking, especially down in an area there.
Very good. You're correct.
You have any response?
So what was able to work to a certain extent in the early days of COVID was to be able to work with some of the not-for-profit organizations and the churches to be able to make their parking lots available. We recognize that the Lancaster Parking Authority parking garages are more centrally located. They don't positively affect the outlying neighborhoods, but there are lots of other opportunities. Sometimes they need to be negotiated. Sometimes they need to be, we may need to tap into the Adopt-a-Block program so that we recognize that there's a common need that can be fulfilled in these rare occasions where we've got these snow emergencies, so that we can get the streets cleared and therefore get a much higher percentage of parking spaces available significantly sooner than we currently do. Right now, it can take up to 3 weeks before you get cleared out because we are we don't aggressively clear the parking lanes. What we're trying to do is provide the way of being able to aggressively clear the parking lanes. And yes, the level of inconvenience that we currently have may be very severe in the moment, but it will be alleviated with that immediate clearance of the parking lanes. Suddenly, if Pershing Avenue, if we can get through that one day, Pershing Avenue and the rest of that quadrant or that octant is suddenly very clear, and people have parking for that entire neighborhood. But these are the types of things that will need to be described in such a public meeting.
Yeah, but my suggestion is before you go and put up signs like that, because when people clear out their parking space, they normally put a chair or something out there, all right, in order to maintain their space. Now, and then even when they do get a snow plow to come down the street, they will clean up between the cars and throw it back in the middle of the street to try to just clear that side of the street off. So the question is, why would you want to put up signs restricting them from being able to park on that day, and now that you have street cleaning first and third of each month?
So I'm sorry, I have been totally derelict in my duty to keep comments to a certain amount of length. I think we kind of need to wrap up the back and forth because I also have another comment from Ms. Lopez. And yeah, I would encourage another public meeting, and the Traffic Commission meeting, as Ms. Wilson suggested, the next one is on November 9th at 3:30 p.m. As Councilor Bakay has helpfully supplied, the deadline to get on the agenda is October 22nd, so 10 days from now. And I would encourage additional conversation on this point, as it is important, but outside of this meeting.
Very good.
Thank you, Reverend Shell. I'm going to have Jessica Lopez.
Well, let me just say that, and I do understand what you're saying, but I just think that the fact, even before you consider putting up signs, you got to have more input from the community, especially the people that live in the area.
Thank you, Reverend.
Thank you.
Jessica Lopez, 437 East Marion. My thing is, with our parking authority being a private administration, and I get that this doesn't affect the Southeast in this instance, but with our parking authority being a private administration, where those parking garages are on those days that they have street cleaning in the area in which those parking garages are, those parking garages should be free. I feel like if they are a private entity that gets to capitalize off of our streets that we pay for, they should have to give us something. And if we have to move our vehicles, not on the Southeast, this is going to be, I have a different suggestion for there, but if they have to move their vehicles in the area where the parking authority gets to capitalize on garages, those garages should be free the day and times that people have to move their cars off the streets. It only makes sense being that they are a private entity collecting money from us and putting people in debtors' prisons. But in the Southeast, I feel like you should rotate. Like, I get that it's a little more work on the Department of Works because you will have to do blocks in the same vicinity on different days, but it makes more sense to do it that way than to make everybody in that area move their cars on the same day and time where nowhere to go. I think that it should be rotating, and I don't believe y'all should change that amendment when you really go down to voting on it. When it comes to not being allowed to utilize the other side of the street on narrow blocks, don't change that. They don't have anywhere to put their cars. And if we're projecting in the next 5 years that we're adding another 2,000 properties, 2,000 units, you got to figure 4,000 cars if you give everybody two to a unit. You change that now, we're really going to be screwed, and we already have it to where a private entity is taxing and people are becoming incarcerated off of this. It's not like our city police department is taxing us on these regulations. This is a private entity that's getting away with this stuff. So it's like, yeah, their parking garages should be forced to be free on those days, and it should be rotating shifts when it comes to Persian, Green, and those areas. It shouldn't be all at one time. It doesn't make sense to make everybody move at one time with nowhere to go. I just think that's something that Department of Works should take into consideration when they revise this before the meeting on the 9th.
Thank you, Jessica.
No problem, thank you.
Okay. Tony?
Tony Dasher, 700 block New Holland Avenue. I think some of the comments that have been made tonight exemplify why having some sort of non-financial burden as opposed to just finding people's more valid. And I hope that before this gets finalized in completeness, we can potentially have a community discussion about that. I also hope that this doesn't get approved prior to, if we're going to have a conversation at the next Traffic Commission meeting. I hope that this does not get approved until after that conversation can be had. I think the points being made about the parking authority, though, are some of the most valid and resonate with me the most. Because years ago, it said to me things like, we're not able to decriminalize cannabis. And I'm using that because the same individual said that it's not difficult. Like, this parking issue is not difficult. This person is in the room right now, and it's not you. But this is why these things frustrate me personally, is because we now have residents here speaking on these issues and how frustrating it is. And these things have been known for some time, but they haven't always been aptly addressed. I thank you for what you're doing here, because I think it's been much needed. I expect confusion around some of this, and I'm sure that part of why they're eager to get this done is because snow periods are coming up, and this is meant to address some of the snow issue. So I totally understand the need for expedience. But yeah, I think that one of the things that's been said that is the most reasonable is we need to tell people where they can park their cars when they have an obligation. And the parking authority is a quasi-governmental organization. Like, Lancaster City government has some sort of control with the Lancaster Parking Authority. Am I incorrect in that?
The mayor has the authority to appoint the board members to the Lancaster Parking Authority.
Okay. So we need to, like, the Lancaster Parking Authority's view in the city is not great, and it's because a lot of people get tickets and we don't like it. We really need to leverage them in some way, shape, or form, because what I think we're really identifying is that we can't keep relying on cars. Like, they're expensive. Frankly, it's an industry who's also profiting off of us, selling us a thing to get to and from work when there's services that are designed, and cars are relatively new compared to humanity, 100 years or so. So wrapping it up, thank you, but I do think that before we finalize this, we do need to have a more extensive conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Dastra. Ms. Darby?
Janae Darby, 300 block of South Marshall Street. First, I do want to give an appreciation for your very first one on there, because I was told before, when the snow emergency is known to the residents, that when it is lifted, nothing has to be said. So I appreciate the fact now that something is going to be said about that, because I had an issue with that and I called you about that. And I appreciated that you did the next time, put out a notice, which I shared on Southeast Times. So I just want to thank you for that part, because many people might not have known before that you didn't have to say anything to us. Okay. So also, again, every sentiment that everyone said, the parking is horrible. RPP definitely needs revised. Like, that is just a horrific situation. So I'm glad that that's also going to be looked into as well. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Very good. Thank you, Mr. Campbell. All right, that brings us to Administration Bill number 22, 2021. Mr. Harris. Oh, sorry. Take your time.
Yes, Mr. President. An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Lancaster, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, establishing appropriations of $5 million of American Rescue Plan Act proceeds received in 2021, providing for the repeal of inconsistent ordinances, providing for the severability of the ordinance, and providing that the ordinance shall take effect as provided by Pennsylvania law. The first reading, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Who from I guess Councilor Beke.
Oh, it was already on. I don't have anything additional from the committee, but I believe that the mayor may have something additional this evening.
On this, I think that the question before council is really about the process that we want to be utilizing. The administration is requesting $5 million of the American Rescue Plan Act funds to support the housing, an investment in affordable housing. This is a critical need in our community. We all recognize it. And Mr. Dels has laid out the strategy regarding those goals. I think that we need to have further conversation about the Economic Development Committee and the committee process, because obviously there's going to be more projects that are going to be brought forward from the community and how we do that. And I just am really committed to making a substantial investment out of the gate to fund something that we all know is really, really important. And we've been working very hard with each of you and staff and the public. If you go to Engage Lancaster, you clearly see that affordable housing is one of the clear priorities. We've been talking about it for a long time. We now have some data that confirms things that we know anecdotally, and we're going to continue to learn. And this is the first bite at an apple that is much bigger. And to Ms. Lopez's point, it's not enough. We recognize that, and we need to continue to advocate for additional dollars from the federal and state level and even county to support a more investment in affordable housing. 88% of the land in the city of our 7.3 square miles is already residential housing. So there's not a lot of place to go, which goes to Mr. Daster's point about can we go up? And so this is just going to continue to be a conversation and learning for us all in terms of how to move this money forward. And we are requesting council to make its mark and say $5 million, we're doing it. We're going to invest in affordable housing, and we're going to develop a process to figure out all of the steps to make that happen. Thank you.
Thanks. Mayor Strachey, I have a question and maybe just a point of clarification. And I think it's really important to perhaps make this very explicit, and maybe it's not. So the appropriation that's being, that it's on the table here with this bill seems to tie directly to the interim housing strategy. Is that correct? And is that how these particular dollars that we're saying will be spent? Is that the framework?
Yes, that's the framework. Decisions will not be made outside of that framework. We've outlined those 5 goals, those objectives related to what do we mean by affordable housing. And we understand that there are 3 bands of affordable housing that we're talking about, and we're going to be focusing on those bands.
Thank you.
Council comments.
I just want to be clear to understand, Mayor, that we're going to work on affordable housing, but not all $5 million, or you're saying that this is exactly what is being set forward?
No, I think that, thank you, Counselor. I think that this is $5 million to start. We have $39.5 million that has been, I believe, overdue to the city of Lancaster. We have seen reductions in CDBG funding almost year after year after year. And there were days in 15, 20 years ago when we had more funds to dedicate to affordable housing and other community projects. Over time, that money has been eroded at the federal level. This money is, in my view, back pay for all of the CDBG dollars that we haven't gotten as a city for many, many years. And so this is an investment into our community, into our city, and $5 million is the first step. And I feel really strongly that these ARPA dollars, the first commitment of these funds should go to the community. We're going to get to next month, November, when we're introducing the city budget, and we're going to be talking about revenue replacement and the things that we need as a city as part of that $39.5 million. It's not even half. We're not going to be talking about $20 million, but we know this is such an important thing. We have an interim housing strategy that has laid out specific things, and it is up to us as a council to figure out the process for approving specific projects as part of that. I just am really, we have just this incredible opportunity to answer Ms. Bird's questions. These projects have kept coming before us, right? And we haven't had any tools in the toolbox to be able to say, we are going to make sure that 10% of the units in this project are affordable at 60% AMI. We just haven't had those tools. We now have those tools. So let's make it happen.
Thank you.
Council President, so the other piece of this is going to be ongoing oversight of this appropriation and what happens to those dollars. And City Council serves several purposes. One of them is making sure that our residents are informed and that we're being good stewards of their dollars, because these dollars belong to them. And so what we'll be tasked with is making sure that there's ongoing oversight and communication about what happens within this framework for these dollars. And so I think it's really important to note for the public, for members of council, that we'll be leaning on ourselves to hold ourselves accountable to continue to put that out there to the public. So through the economic development committees, community planning committees, is where I think it makes the most sense to do that. But it will also be a two-way street, because it will require continued engagement, like this evening, from the public to be aware of what's happening in the projects that are going on. And I also think that engagement outside of regular council meetings will also be necessary to continue to keep the public informed. So I think it's a two-part plan.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Bakay. And also, I think that this is something that Director Dels looks forward to working with the committees to facilitate the process. And we're just getting started, y'all. This is new for all of us in terms of being able to have these funds, to create a process that is both responsive to the community's needs and also meets the letters of the law as it relates to the Treasury guidance, which I will also note is still interim at this moment. We're waiting for the final guidance on that. So this is not fully established at this point, and I appreciate the conversation and the opportunity. This is a really important step that we're beginning to take.
Other council comments? Was there anything specific that you or any of our city partners wanted to address this evening, Director Delfs, before we go to comments from the public?
Not in addition.
Okay.
Happy to answer any additional questions. I appreciate how much time you allocated before to the presentation and all the questions. I don't have additional comments at this time, but I'm at your disposal.
It's much appreciated.
Jessica Lopez, East Marion Street. I'm just trying to get some clarification on this. Are you saying that the funds are just like, okay, so we're gonna allocate this 5 million, but they're not necessarily going to this plan?
The allocation of these dollars in this interim moment is, not this interim moment, as a first step to addressing affordability in the city, will be invested in consultation with council in the ways in which that plan has outlined around those 5 goal areas, with those 3 policy objectives around production, protecting, and what's the third one, Chris?
Acquire, innovate, and sustain.
Yes, thank you. So those are the goals, and then we have those numeric targets that we're aiming to reach with these funds. So I would say at this point, the administration is asking council to appropriate out of the $39.5 million, $5 million to go to affordable housing to achieve the goals that are outlined in that interim housing strategy.
And I understand, I mean, I heard that part, but my thing, like, I just put it in dum-dum terms for me.
No, you are not that.
Oh, no, you know, I'm not. But at the same time, we got to speak in, a little layman's terms on this one. So when it comes to that plan, because the thing is with that proposal, it doesn't sound as if it's going to really bring affordable housing. Just as the way I'm hearing it, I'm not hearing, more than such and such amount of people are actually, let's be real, in the hood terms, the Section 8 list would be open for all of a matter of 2 seconds if that plan was the plan that actually came into fruition. So then my question is, okay, yeah, I understand the allocation of the 5 million. Yes, we need affordable housing. Yes, we need an affordable plan. But I kind of want to hear, like, y'all say that this plan isn't the plan we're putting the 5 million into. I get the points of it, but not the exact plan. Like, I don't want to wake up tomorrow and they talk about how this contractor got the building on King Street and it's about to be 76 apartments and only 5 are going to be low income, because that's you taking $100,000 of the 2.2 million it took to build the building and giving it to low income, where the other 1.5 million is over here in the condos. And that's the way we're hearing this plan. We're not hearing this plan as if affordable housing is going to come into the city. We're hearing this plan as we already don't have housing for 14,000 people, and we're talking about putting 5 million into 300 houses for affordable people. That's the way we're hearing it. So
I'm sorry, if I may, Ms. Lopez, I think to your point in simplifying what we're trying to do here, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, so the 5 million is really just allocating the dollars towards the broader goal of affordable housing, which is, I think, what we all want. The strategic plan that's outlined today, I think a good way for us to think about it is that's the why is affordable housing. What we want to do are those 3 priorities around protect and the P's. I think the how we're going to do that is still to be determined.
And that's what I just wanted a security on that answer. The how is still in question, and it's not this direct plan that is where the money's going to.
Let me. I'm sorry.
Sorry, yeah, exactly. So how we're going to do this, I think, is still to be determined based on a process, making sure we get community input. And I think a lot of things that we heard today were really just examples. So when we think of the strategic plan, it's good to look at it as guidelines of where we want to go. But we're looking for all of you and all of council as well to think about how do we get there with all of your input. So,
all right, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Bird?
Yes, Darlene Ann Street. I was going to say the same thing. I don't think there's a problem to say that we invest $5 million in affordable housing. Who would say that's a problem? The issue that we see is there's not a direct plan. And since council does not yet have a process to determine how those plans are going to be selected, I think we're putting the cart before the horse and saying, let's put $5 million here. And we're saying, we've seen that before. We've seen the city say they're invested. We saw the report that said by 2030, we're going to have 25, affordable housing units. We hear there's going to be 2,000. And we're not saying we shouldn't invest $5 million in affordable housing. What we're saying is we need to know, what is that process going to be? How is that going to be selected? And if we're already setting money aside, who's to say in the next council meeting, we're not setting aside money for streets or something else within the administration that's not really addressing our community? I mean, if we're going to allocate money, South End Concerned Neighbor presented a plan to every last one of these city council members. It was $5,000 into our community that would also help to address affordable housing as far as working with Tenfold and creating housing and having a facility to be able to do that. I mean, why are we not talking about that as well? Because that's also in the strategic plan of strong neighborhoods. That is also something that the city is going for. These are plans that are ready. So if we don't have that process already figured out, then how are we saying we're going to give this $5 million? But we're not going to look at these other projects that came before council looking for this ARPA money to help our community as well. And I'm just saying, I agree with you, Mayor, about put money in affordable housing. That's not what's in questioning here. It's how this money is going to be spent different than all the other millions of dollars that we used in affordable housing in the past, that we're actually going to see an effect of that money being spent. So I present to council that they consider the South End Concerned Neighbor Plan and appropriating money. That plan's ready to go. You know where that money is going to be spent. You know what it's going to do. It's not just some detail written out here. We have everything that we need to move forward with that plan, where this one is just a strategic plan that is very broad and saying it's going to help us in the neighborhood in the city. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Ms. Byrd.
Tony Dasher, 700 block of New Holland Avenue. I just wanted to take this moment to kind of flesh out some of the things I had referenced earlier, especially building up. Because I think one of the problems with, as we're building new housing, is not building housing with the intention to build on top of it later. I think what you point out by, like, what's the difference between just building on top of a structure? With the way things are, being able to add 1 or 2 stories might not cut it in the long run for where cities are headed. So part of what I was trying to illustrate was not just being able to sell these land rights, but essentially building developments with the intention that someday somebody's going to build on top of here, and it might not be me. So maybe building, because another whole part of affordable housing, we hear all the time that new housing can't be made affordable because of the cost of construction. And we worry about building large amounts of housing in certain manners because it might segregate us by income. By having structures where we are already inclined to build on top of them later in the future, we might be integrating income housing by design, because the newer housing would be constructed on top of what's already existing and would be the most affordable thing to rehab. So that I wanted to just flesh out a little bit more, because you did ask, and I think that's a horrible, not horrible, a completely valid question. Makes sense to me. The other thing I wanted to point out, to hit on the acquire note of the plan here, I think we can leverage this $5 million. But I already said earlier, I'm not super comfortable with just allocating money to something without a clear path forward, and I think that's echoed in the room as well. But I've mentioned in the past about how we can use land assets to leverage them towards the multimodal transportation grant. I think 30% was the threshold. So I do think that some of these funds in this $5 million can be utilized, leveraged over top of itself to get us more money from the state government, so that we can also build more robust transit systems in Lancaster City. And I even think that 838 Marietta Avenue, while it's not directly on Route 2 right now, I think with some conversations with RRTA and some solid plans, we could integrate it into a transportation plan and be able to leverage those funds over and on top of a grant, hopefully. Thank you. You guys have a good one.
just have two questions. Number one is that, and council can ask this, does council not say that they were not voting on this plan?
That's correct. This is a first reading.
Okay. So if council is not voting on this plan, then why will the mayor ask for $5 million to be allocated for a plan not even completed?
Well, so I can answer that briefly. So the $5 million is an allocation of reservation for specific projects that have come down the pipeline, which we, per our committee meeting, are going to have more specific information before we vote. And if we don't have it, then my suggestion would be that we move the proposal along. The interim housing strategy, or that we, table the proposal until we have the specific information. The interim housing strategy is an overall strategy which is going to encompass not just ARPA dollars, home dollars, CDBG dollars. And in fact, that's actually not an item being voted on. Ostensibly, the allocation comes up for a vote at the next meeting, but that is specific to the use of ARPA dollars for a first round investment in affordable housing. We will probably end up coming back and putting more money into that purpose as more projects come in completed, or proposals come in completed.
So as I heard Darlene from the South Ann Street Concerned Citizen Group mention that there's a project that's already in place and a plan been already submitted for $5,000. $500,000. Oh, why wouldn't that plan be already addressed, which would definitely benefit the Southeast low-income family?
Yeah, so I don't think, actually, I think council is in favor of that plan, as has been communicated to South End concerned neighbors. And to my understanding, Ms. Bird has been in contact with at least me, Councilor Craig, whose committee would ostensibly filter these, and the mayor. A couple of things. One, as I recollect, the request was for $250,000 from the city, not $500,000. But also, if we're going to just like do it on Front Street, I am awaiting like specifics on how the project will, because I was then told that the project includes housing elements and not just the community center element. Not that the community center is not worthwhile on its own, but if it's to be considered as a part of the housing allocation, how specifically it contributes to additional housing. And I have also not been provided with evidence of the CHODO, Community Housing Development Organization, recertification application. So those two things I do not have. I would love to consider it when I do have those things.
Well, let me just say that we know that there's $39 million that is out there coming to the city. And I think that council need to be very responsible and take it very slow at just allocating money, because just as it come tonight, allocate $5 million, next month, you come again with allocate $5 million, and without any really community input. Just like on the first Friday, there was signs up down in the square asking people for how to spend this $39 million. We get a lot of people from outside of the county coming in, telling the city how to spend this $39 million, and very few city residents have their input. So I would ask council again, before they make any decision on allocating money, before a complete, solid foundation, to really think about that before they just up and say yes, because I do not think that's the way to go.
Thank you.
If I could just make one final note on this, which I know the hour is late. we needed to directionally align where we were going to invest these dollars, and that's what the interim housing strategy does. It is not to the specifics that I know everybody here wants, including myself. And if we don't have that, we cannot assess proposals or directionally know where we're going. So the plan is just that. We then need a process to get us to realizing those goals, and that we needed to have community and public buy-in for the plan so that we can then create a process that's going to get us to that plan. So I just want to underscore, I totally hear everybody's, we want details, we want details. This is just a step in the direction of getting us there. And so I appreciate everybody's forbearance, and I want to echo Director Delph's thanks for having the depth of conversation that we have had tonight now and well past, I don't know, I've lost track of time, how many hours we've been going here.
Thank you, Mayor.
I'll be real
Ms.
quick.
Byrd, please.
We did submit our total recertification. That has been submitted. We are just waiting to hear back. That was done after you said for us to do that. The 500,000, you had Faith Craig come and meet with us, Councilwoman Faith Craig, and she said you should ask for the whole amount. So that's where we are.
Yep.
When we met you back in June with our proposal, I think it was in July. Yeah, at that time, that's what we were looking at. And after meeting with other council members and, so that's where we are at the table. That application is in. I think you checked on it. It is in. We supplied everything that we need. So so we understand that.
Great. Director Delphs, would you please forward me that as you have it, or if you would just forward me a copy of your application, Ms. Byrd, and then, just any specific, where the specific dovetail is on housing beyond just the community center.
Right.
Would love to see it.
Yep.
So wherever that comes
We're
from,
looking to buy
if it
some
can come to my
houses
email
and
inbox, I'd be very
renovate them.
appreciative. Great. Okay. I'm going to move us along to subheading C, resolutions. Yep, great. Resolution number 53, 2021. Mr. Harris?
Yes, Mr. President. A resolution of the Council of the City of Lancaster authorizing a joint application with the Lancaster Public Library for a Keystone Grant for public library facilities through the Pennsylvania Department of Education for the development of a new library.
Motion to approve?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Councilor Craig is not with us this evening, but either Councilor Becky or Arroyo, please.
Thank you, Council President. This resolution is for the joint application with the City of Lancaster and Lancaster Public Library for the Keystone Grant. This is a $750,000 grant request through this Keystone Grant program, which is specific to libraries and funds the renovation or new construction of library facilities. The $750,000 request is the max amount that could be requested and is required that the municipality apply for the grant and support the application, which is the purpose of this resolution. That's all I have. If there's Mr. Hopkins or anyone else that want to add to that.
Thank you, Councilor Arroyo. Questions or comments from council?
Council President?
Please.
Just to say that we recently heard a presentation from the public library talking about all of the ways that they were able to continue to reach the community through COVID, and obviously the way that they've been able to do it on a very small budget. This makes sense. It obviously doesn't spend any city dollars, but it allows us to hopefully get them where they need to be in terms of construction to a new and modern facility.
Thank you. Comments from the public? Mr. Dastra?
Joey Dastra, 100 block in North Plum Street. I'll be super quick. I'm just very happy that we're supporting the public library. I got my public library hoodie on right now. I got another one for my partner. I can promise you if they weren't an hour away at college, they'd be at the library like 2 to 3 times a week. Public library is a great resource. Keep up the good work.
Much appreciated. Any other comments from the public? Hearing none, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Arroyo.
Aye.
Ms. Baker.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
And President Smith-Waddell.
Aye. That brings us to Administration Resolution Number 54, 2021. Mr. Harris?
A resolution of the Council of the City of Lancaster approving an amended capital project list to be funded by the proceeds of the City of Lancaster General Obligation Bonds, Series 2016A.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Councilor Baker.
Thank you very much. So Resolution 54 ties closely with Resolution 55, which is up next, as I mentioned in my interim report. This has to do with the reallocation of funds in bonds, in this case, the 2016 bonds that were unused in previous projects that are left over, and allocating them to other capital improvement expenditures. If Mr. Hopkins has anything additional to add, I'll let him do that at this time.
Given that it is 10 after 10, we've been here about 3.5 hours. Unless there are any questions, I don't have anything additional to add beyond the report that I gave to you at the committee meeting last week.
Wait, don't go yet.
Councilor Diaz?
Just a quick.
I tried.
Just a quick one. Can you tell me exactly how much we'll be saving again? Like, do you recall that?
Well, so these two resolutions are, I think you might be referencing the refinancing that we did previously. This is just the reallocation of bond funds that we had from the 2016 bond issue and then the 2018 bond issue.
It's money we've already saved, essentially.
Right. The refinancing that we did last month,
Right.
total savings was about $7.3 million.
Thank you. That's all, folks.
From the public.
I know time is late, so I'm going to get really brief. I just want to know for the reallocations of this money, are there any legal guidelines that says where this money has to go or what it can be used for?
I do believe it's capital improvement projects because of the initial bond. Is that correct, Mr. Hopkins? You're sort of shaking your head, yes.
Yeah, there are typically what we're using bond proceeds for are city projects themselves. There isn't a legal prohibition on using bond proceeds for projects that are outside of city projects. There are limitations on the private use, funds that go to an entity for private use, like a private entity to a corporation, something like that. There are other limits, it would obviously it depends on what a project is, but the project funds that we're talking about for the reallocations here are wholly within the scope of city-funded projects.
Thank you.
And one of the projects are new, which is paving for the 2022. So that's not a city project yet. It's something that's going to come up, correct? That's a new project. That's not a pre-existing project.
Well, in the 2022 paving project is, strictly speaking, it's a new project for the use of those bond funds. But it really, street paving is a constant year after year after year after year project. So when I use the term project in the terms of the capital improvement plan, it is because there is not a 2022 paving project already approved by City Council. And this, the second resolution will be adding that as a, no, I'm sorry, the first resolution actually would be adding that as a use of those funds.
And the other question I would ask is the CDBG funds that are left over, how much are they and what are they going to? There was portions of CDBG funds that were not spent, that was going to be spent and reallocated.
Is that going to be part of as part of the capital improvement plan that we voted on?
No, it's not. It's not part of either of the two resolutions. What I had mentioned at the committee meeting last week is that in addition to the two sources from the capital bond fund of street paving funds, we also do apply liquid fuels funds and some portion of community development block grant funding for street paving as well.
Which is?
And those three buckets of funding would total approximately $2 million for street paving in 2022.
Which has already been earmarked in that 5-year plan that we were discussing.
Yes,
Okay.
Right. So, yeah, I would direct that question, Darlene, to Director Delph's offline because they can give you the specifics on how any and all CDBG funds have been spent to date.
Okay, yeah, because I was here, and when he gave the report, there was money that was going to be taken that was left over from CDBG that was going to go into paving. And we're like, if you didn't spend that money for CDBG, instead of applying it to paving, why not put it back into the community? I mean, this is money that's being reallocated that wasn't spent. It can go anywhere but to private corporations is what the legal says you can't spend it on. But other than that, council could say where they want to see these funds reallocated. Now, we cry affordable housing again. We're talking about how many million?
We're mixing a lot of apples and
No,
oranges. The cost savings that we had from the refinancing was $7.3 million. Most of that is within the sewer fund. There's a portion of it that's in the water fund, and there's a portion that's in the general fund.
What portion of it is in the general fund? Ballpark me.
About $3.1 million of savings across 2021 and 2022. And I'll just remind everybody that we have a $5 million deficit budget in 2021, and that's a hole that we're trying to fill.
Okay, so that's just, I think as far as I'm concerned, that's money to prevent the next tax increase.
Correct, yeah.
I didn't hear what you said, I'm sorry.
As far as I'm concerned, that's money that should just go to prevent the next tax increase so that we don't have to raise taxes on our already overtaxed residents.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily found money, it's found savings.
Indeed.
Okay.
Yeah, it's money that wasn't spent on projects, and so it's being reallocated to other projects that the city has a list of. When you approve capital bonds, you approve a select projects that those bonds are going to be used for. So once they're done, like take the firehouse on West King Street, and it was completed, there was money that was left over. Now, that money can be reallocated at council or administration's choice, as long as it's not to private incorporations. But I understand if we're using it so we don't raise the taxes, but then we say that, and that was my question I was asking. Well, we care about affordable housing. We have all this money that wasn't spent. Why is it not being invested also into that affordable housing? Or even using that for that 3.1 toward that 5 million you need, not even using ARPA money. That wouldn't even have the restrictions that come with it. I mean, it's just a flip toss.
I think just to follow up with you is that all of these things are very important, and there's a very limited pool of money to do it with. And we also have a lot of conversations in this room about street paving and when that happens. And so, as Mr. Hopkins was saying, part of this was already allocated to that. And if we have some savings elsewhere in the bond and we wanted to move more over to do more street paving, that's also a good thing. It's an and, not an or, in my mind.
And I understand that. It's just that the 2021 street paving funds have not even been spent yet, and we're already putting money into the 2022. So,
Okay, I'm gonna.
Okay.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Bird. Any other public comments? Hearing none, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Arroyo.
Aye.
Ms. Baker.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
President Smith-Waddell.
Aye. That brings us to Administration Resolution number 55, 2021. Mr. Harris.
Resolution of the Council of the City of Lancaster approving an amended capital project list to be funded by the proceeds of the City of Lancaster General Obligation Bonds, Series of 2018.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Councilor Baker, this is yours again.
Yeah, this is similarly, this is just another reallocation, this time for the 2018 bond funds. And funds that were either not earmarked for anything or left over from completed projects.
Great. Council comments from the public. Hearing none, Mr. Harris.
Mr. Arroyo.
Aye.
Ms. Beke.
Aye.
Ms. Diaz.
Aye.
President Smith-Waddell.
Aye. Excellent. That brings us to our second public comment period. Did I say aye? Did I actually vote?
You did.
Great, beautiful.
I know.
That brings us to our second public comment period, which is open for comment about items not on the agenda. The rules remain the same generally.
I just wanted, Tanae, 300 block of South Marshall Street. I just wanted to give a personal appreciation. I didn't want to do it during the resolution because I didn't want to take away from that moment on the resolution for the Protecting the Rights to Organize Act. Many of council already knows that my husband is a Kellogg's worker and he is on the picket line. So I greatly appreciate that resolution being brought forth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Gray.
Ted Gray, 200 block of South Ann Street. Only thing I had to say is Persian Avenue in the plan for paving the 500 block? Hasn't been done for 40 years. Is that in the plan for paving? 22?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's what
Okay, that's all I want to ask.
Thank you, Mr. Gray.
All right.
Mayor?
Nothing.
I also have nothing. Councilors?
If I may. Just because it is a long night, a huge thank you to Director Douse and Director Campbell that I know I appreciate the public engagement. I also appreciate the strategic thinking. And I know we've talked about some of these items in previous meetings to lead up to these ordinances. So I think the more that we do that and can engage, it always leads to better outcomes. So I know it's a long night, but just wanted to publicly appreciate you guys and your teams as well for doing it. So thank you.
Hear, hear. All right. You know the drill. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Good night.